Welcome to the Some Dare Call It Conspiracy podcast, hosted by Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. After nearly 20 years exploring the world of conspiracy culture, we are taking our guests and listeners on a guided tour of the rabbit hole. Our mission? To discover where the truth lies.
Episode 3, here we are.
Yeah, we're getting there, aren't we? Third time's a charm and all that, I reckon.
Yeah, I think this one will make us or break us.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
This one's a bit more fun. A bit more fun than the last one, a little bit more lighthearted.
We'll see. You don't know.
I mean, there's allegedly burning of effigies and all that, but hey, we'll get into that in a bit. Shall we welcome our guest first?
Yes.
Well, what she doesn't know about absolutely nothing ain't worth knowing. It is Intel Lady. Welcome, Jen.
Hi, hello. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So you got a YouTube channel, and would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your channel?
I've actually got two. Right. So I've been on YouTube since 2015. I started a channel because I'm a spiritual person, and I wanted a channel where I could do just simple like oracle card readings. That was my thing. That was what I was into. And then that developed into me writing and recording guided meditations. And that became like my passion. And from there, I just talked about my spiritual journey, my belief system, and anything that goes with that. And what I noticed was in the spiritual community, there was a lot of crossovers into ufology, truther, and how do I say this without getting into trouble? The letter Fringe. Of the alphabet.
Oh, yeah.
Side
oh,
of
you
things.
Can say it.
Fair enough, yeah. So there was this bizarre crossover from people in the spiritual community to the QAnon stuff and lots and lots of, not just QAnon, but lots of conspiracies. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a little peek into several of these rabbit holes. Because I was like, what is this? This is a new world to me. I've always been spiritual, but I've never had any particular interest in conspiracy stuff. I didn't really know anything about, I mean, you hear stuff, but I wasn't knowledgeable about any of it. But I found once you become a YouTuber, you sort of find yourself more exposed to these kinds of things. And so I'm sort of dipping in and out. Oh, what's this? What's this? Is that? Oh my goodness me! And I'm finding all this stuff, and it's mad and so entertaining. And you sort of get drawn into the fantasy of it. I think. But I was able to keep it at arm's length and just find it more interesting than anything else. But what disturbed me was how people in the spiritual community, the community that I was part of, were crisscrossing into really dark and bizarre worlds of conspiracy. And it was something I kept at arm's length until I think probably around 2019, when I was like, you lot are getting a bit much with all of this stuff now. And it just seemed to be like everyone I followed, everyone I thought was a spiritual person, was kind-natured, was heart-centered, was everything that I admired, were parroting the same things. And one person in particular stood out to me that had crossed from the ufology side, a spiritual side, straight over to the American Patriot, QAnon, hardcore side, and that was a certain ex-driving instructor, ex-politician.
The counselor.
Yeah. And so I called him out on my spiritual channel.
This is the person whose mummy is a lizard?
Yes.
Okay.
And has an alien baby called Zarka. Yeah, that's one. And did the Channel 4 documentary all about it.
Neil's looking a little confused.
Neil.
I don't mind saying his name.
Cat alien bloke.
Simon Park.
Yeah. That idiot,
Yeah, cat alien, yeah. So I called him out on my channel, and to my surprise, I got all the flying monkeys coming into my comments section telling me I'm not a real how dare you call yourself a light worker? You're not a light worker. You're this, you're that, you're a fraud. I was called a fraud by so many people because I called out Simon Parks and said, I'm sorry, but he's talking garbage. And, he's doing a lot of damage to a lot of different communities. And I think it's wrong. And I did it on the day of Joe Biden's inauguration as well, because I just got
symbolism.
Yeah, I'm like, do you know what? I'm deliberately going to do this on the day of the inauguration, because I'd sat back and watched as he'd made all of these ridiculous promises to his followers. Oh, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. He's, Trump's definitely going to get inaugurated. It's going to happen. It's definitely going to happen. And you just think, okay, how is Mr. Driving Instructor? I have liaisons with Cat Queen aliens 4 times a year. How does he know all this? And I also just knew that he had nothing to do with MI5, MI6, the CIA, or anything else. There's just no way. Just looking where he lives and does his videos from, I'm like, come on, you're not paid by anyone.
Isn't that the perfect cover, though?
That's exactly what he would say. So I just thought, you know what? I'll do it on the inauguration. Obviously, I get all this backlash. I get so many people unsubscribing from my channel. And so I thought, I'm just going to double down. I'm just going to keep going with this. I'm not backing down, because people are calling me a fraud for calling out a fraud and not a real light worker. And, you're not. I'm like, you know what? No, I'm never. If I say something, I have to stand by it. I can't start backtracking. Oh, I'm losing followers. How terrible. Don't cancel me. Oh, no. I'll say what I need to say and I'll stand by it. So that's what I did. And then I found, once I made that video, actually, I started the magic of YouTube and algorithms, I guess. I started seeing a lot of other YouTubers who were calling out the same people. And Charlie Ward, I didn't know much about Charlie Ward until Simon Parkes went to the Q side. And then suddenly this completely bald timeshare salesman from Spain who also works for Trump, all of this nonsense. I'm like, okay, I don't know who this guy is, but a lot of people knew who he was, and they were also calling him out. So I started talking to people in that calling out the grifters community and found the show Griftbusters, got chatting to them, and someone had sent in a sketch reenacting Charlie Ward having a phone call with the cleaning lady at the central bank. I don't know if you know that he'd said this. He'd made this claim that
No.
I rang the central bank, and you'll never guess what, the cleaning lady answered the phone. And I said to her, how's it going? And she said, oh, it's going really well. And I said, what, anything happening there? Oh, how are the new quantum computers? Oh, they're lovely. All this absolute nonsense. I'm like, I can't believe people actually listen to this man, and worse, pay him €11 a month for this information. This is like mind blowing to me. Someone had reenacted this with quite a funny sketch. I'm like, oh, hang on a minute. I could do that. My background is in acting. I was a professional actor before I had children. So I might go back to my roots here and throw something together. So I did. I made it quite a few sketches actually for Griftbusters. And Intel Lady did not exist at that time. I was just me with my Lightworker Lady YouTube channel. And I made these sketches, and then I thought, actually, you know what? I think I need a different YouTube channel. I don't really think I could put these sketches, because all people that are subscribed to me are like, what the hell is she doing? So I'm like, okay. But I made it really, really clear on both my channels what I was doing. There was no hiding away either side of me. I am a spiritual person. I'm also a professionally trained actor, and I love both things equally. And I feel like, if there's one way, a unique way of getting through to people about these con artists, about these conspiracy pushers that are saying some of the most disgusting, outrageous things I've ever heard, and it seems to be getting worse and worse and worse. They're like having a competition with the most outrageous things they can tell you right now. I'll do it through comedy. I'll write ridiculous sketches and expose them for the frauds they are by using their own words.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. That's what you do as well. You don't put words in their mouth. You show how ridiculous they actually are.
I literally just repeat what they have said, but I expose how utterly stupid it all is and how it makes no sense. No sense at all, because it doesn't make any sense, anything they say. So that's sort of how Intel Lady came along. I've had the channel a year now, and I enjoy that I can make people smile, I hope, triggering all the right people, I suppose. And if that's how I can wake a few people up, then that's how I'll do it. I think you have to use the skills that you have. And I knew that by sitting on my spiritual channel and saying, guys, these people that you're following, they're not telling you the truth. It will fall on deaf ears, sadly, with quite a few. And also some people who come to a spiritual channel don't want to hear you slagging anyone off.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing light. I made it clear on both channels. This is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. If I can raise the vibration by making people laugh, brilliant. If I can make people realize they're being conned, brilliant. So I suppose I'm giving back to the world in my own unique way, I suppose. I'll do it. I'm not a world expert on every conspiracy theory going, as you're about to find out. But I only need to listen to somebody for 5 or 6 minutes to get an idea of what they're telling people and note a few pearlers down that they're saying to make a sketch exposing them for being total liars and con artists.
Total grifters.
Total grifters. It's just amazing. How much money they make frightens me. It really does.
There's a lot more money on that side than there is this side.
There's no money on this side. Zero on this side. But I think I could sleep at night knowing that I'm not conning people out of money. If people want to donate to me because they find my comedy funny, brilliant. But they don't have to do that. Just share my work out so people can wake up and see it. But anyway, sorry, I that was a really long-winded way of introducing myself. But I thought if I don't give you the backstory, somebody else will.
Sorry, I'll edit out all the important parts.
Falling into our trap now.
Today's episode, we are going to explore Bohemian Grove conspiracy theories, made most popular by Alex Jones. Bohemian Grove is a 2,700-acre plot in the Redwood Forest of Sonoma County, California. The property is owned by a gentleman's club in San Francisco called Bohemian Club. Over a 2-week period, in July, the Grove hosts what is essentially a summer camp for its powerful and elite members. Naturally, when powerful and elite members of society get together in secluded places, some people form conspiracy theories about what's really going on in there. I was one of them. The conspiracies around Bohemian Grove absolutely helped convince me not only that these elites were connected, but these people were dark occultists and evil. So what the hell convinced me and so many people around the world of that? First, we need to know what this theory claims, and Neil is going to do that.
Bohemian Grove is a secret encampment in California where the elites of the world meet to plot and discuss world government whilst conducting satanic rituals in front of an owl god from Babylon. And some say that you have to go there in order to be president. They have gay orgies. They often do things that might compromise politicians for future blackmailing ideas. And some even say that there is ritual sacrifice and snuff films filmed in Bohemian Grove.
That's nothing like what I just said.
Not quite. It does somewhat go to 11.
Have you heard of Bohemian Grove, Jen?
I have, but only through our favourite Alex Jones. And all I know of it was that he had snuck onto the land and filmed something, and there was some sort of grainy video of the giant owl and a bonfire in front of it and people in hooded cloaks or something like that.
Have you seen the footage?
I think I've seen snippets or maybe screenshots of it, but not from start to finish, no.
The whole footage is out there, but they tend to show smaller bits because it's quite long and it all looks really sinister.
And it did look bloody sinister.
It does. Yeah. This is one of the things you cannot deny. The footage exists and it looks a little strange, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you can quite see why anybody, even people who aren't into rabbit holes of conspiracy, would look at that and go, what? Yeah, there's something very, very odd going on there. It is very weird.
It is one of the first things that sort of really sort of piqued my interest in the more sort of, it gives you the impression that there's this underworld of satanic ritual that basically the elites of the world, the politicians of the world, like the very sort of top politicians, American presidents, European prime ministers and presidents, are conducting satanic rituals behind closed doors for whatever reason. And it implies very heavily that this is connected to all sorts of other sort of institutions, and that actually there's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes than people would have you believe.
Had me convinced, mate. It was 2003 when I was watching it. You know, I had seen Millennium 2000 and Lucifer 2000, and they talk about, well, Jordan Maxwell and Anthony J. Hilder mentioned Bohemian Grove in there. I remember thinking, what the hell? And writing it down in my little notebook, going searching for it later, coming across this Dark Secrets Inside Bohemian Grove by Alex Jones, and just be like blown away. Just think, oh my God. They are dark and Satanists. What the hell? You know, and I didn't even really think that existed at that time. You know, I wasn't really Christian or anything at that point. I really thought, shit, yeah, these people are dark.
And I think it was probably my first introduction to Alex Jones as well. You know, he comes across, particularly in the first film, which came out in 2000, called Dark Secrets Inside Bohemian Grove. He's very earnest. He comes across as like he's got something really spectacular to show you. He could be accused potentially of front-loading the argument somewhat. But, you know, like, you can't deny that he got in and he filmed something very, very strange. And as I say, the first sort of big evidence of this came out in 2000. Actually, there was someone who had mentioned Bohemian Grove before that. There was a lady called Kathy O'Brien. Kathy O'Brien is a purported mind control slave. Transformation of America was the first book that came out. It's like a biography. It tells her story of how she was groomed to be a mind control slave and was essentially used as a prostitute for the elites. And in this book, she claims that her daughter, Kerry, I believe her daughter's name was mind controlled herself. Even though she was a child, she was taken to Bohemian Grove and she was used as a prostitute there. She doesn't elaborate much on it, but she also has given out the ominous statement that people go missing in those woods. It certainly does sound like a spooky old place. So, Alex, he starts his program by saying,
time and time again in my research, I come, well, eye to eye with something that's even hard for me to believe. And that's that the elite, again, the so-called establishment kings, those that know best, the visions of the anointed ones, are obsessed with the occult.
And he goes to show this by flashing up a picture of Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan. And he says, we all know the stories of presidents and first ladies obsessed with their astrologers making national policy decisions on their recommendations. And this is apparently true. Nancy Reagan had an astrologer. She was very, very into astrology, and she actually advised Ronald Reagan to make certain gestures, speeches in accordance with the times that she felt would be best for astrology. What is interesting is that basically this is 2000. Alex Jones at this point is quite prepared to slag off Ronald Reagan quite a lot. Like, as we know, recently, bizarrely, InfoWars actually started praising Ronald Reagan. They actually had a sort of little vignette that had Reagan looking all passionate, doing a speech with the InfoWars logo all over it, and basically implying that Reagan was the best president ever, which is not true. He was a war criminal. But anyway, I digress. Now, he goes on to warn you, watching this film, that even though he's personally a Christian, even atheists should be concerned about the information that they're about to show you and what they filmed tonight. What they filmed, according to Alex, was
leaders from around the world, prime ministers, chancellors, presidents, governors, again, the heads of industry, banking, academia, the media, Hollywood, only a select few, a little over 2,000 people, travel there to engage in bizarre, ancient Canaanite, Luciferian, Babylon mystery religion ceremonies.
Off the bat, that just sounds like we know that's dodgy.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair to him, what he does now show is basically a series of photographs that have been taken at Bohemian Grove. And these include pictures of some very, very prominent people throughout society. There's pictures of Bush Jr. and Bush Sr. There's Newt Gingrich there. There's Eisenhower and Herbert Hoover. There's Nixon, there's Art Linklater, and these are all confirmed photographs that were taken at the Grove. So this appears to sort of show his thesis to be correct. There's something that's very, very strange that is attracting all of these people there. And he goes on.
These stories have been coming out that they worship some 45-foot stone owl god. And then I began to read some of the documentation on this Moloch character of the Old Testament, mentioned many times in Leviticus.
And then he adds, for clarity, in case people didn't know,
that's in the Bible. Why are world leaders traveling to the middle of nowhere to worship this thing?
What he's saying is that this owl that he's caught in this ceremony is representative of this Canaanite deity called Moloch. Now, Moloch was a giant figure that they would hollow out. And for some reason, I don't know why, but the firstborn of the Canaanites were thrown inside the belly of this giant animal. And it was filled with fire, and they would literally burn these children to death. Now, this is in the Bible, and there's a degree of potentially suggesting that this might be sort of later religions smearing previous religions and or potentially getting it wrong. As Brent knows far more about this than me.
Well, as it's the Canaanites, they're the descendants of Cain.
So any Avenged Sevenfold fans out there, you should have known that. Anywho, this is what Alex is saying this is representative of. This is going back to the human sacrifice that was practiced in the Old Testament, essentially.
Moloch is a bull, generally, isn't it?
We'll come on to that, but it's an owl here, basically, at the Bohemian Grove. It's an owl, and Alex has discovered through his deep research that this is representative of Moloch.
To have world leaders engaging in this type of sickening behavior, oh yes, there's much more to come. Mock human sacrifices, they claim, just shocks the very foundations of what Americans believe their leaders to be. And then to have it intimately connected with world government. It doesn't make a lot of sense until you research history. All throughout history, spanning back into the midst of the beginnings of civilization, we see world leaders from the empires of old, from the Aztec kings and priests to Babylonian leaders, to ancient Rome, engaging in twisted behavior. Could it be that when you have all the power and all the women and all the money and all the lands and all the art, you have to do something new? You have to go against the basic grain of humanity. You have to get off in a sick way. That's what we witnessed in Northern California, July 15th, 2000. Get ready to go inside the Bohemian Grove.
So what he's implying there is that basically the idea that the elites are so twisted and so sort of jaded through having a luxurious life and literally being able to get anything that they want, that they've gone down the sort of Marquis de Sade route, that they only can gain pleasure by more and more extreme things. And what he's implying is that basically this is shown by this type of behavior. There's an element of truth to this. Again, I suppose, like, you know, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. You're more likely to get involved in dodgy stuff if you can get away with it. I think that knowing that you could definitely sort of, you know, act with impunity would perhaps lead you to do things that you wouldn't do if you knew that there was a potential for going to prison or ruining your reputation for. So,
Prince Andrew.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, not necessarily the elites. Like, you know, look at certain people online. They get a reputation or whatever, and then all of a sudden they're very, very prepared to go where the crowd is, or to lie by a mission in order to gain money. Like putting yourself into positions like where basically people react badly to any degree of power, and having people listen to you and basically go, oh, that's very clever. It's power in a way. And, you know, a lot of people monetize that. So again, it's not beyond belief that Alex might well be onto something here. But he then goes on a bit to talk about the history of the Bohemian Club.
The Bohemian Club, as it's known today, was founded in 1873 in San Francisco in Northern California. Many of the club's original annals, dating back to before the turn of the century, admit that local artists, writers, newspapermen, you name it, wanted a place away from the so-called backwardsness of the West Coast, the Judeo-Christian ethic.
Now, that sounds rather familiar to the sort of stuff that we were talking about last time, but he goes on.
Their annals even admit an obsession with the occult and what they called Druid rituals. Amongst the great redwood trees, they revived ancient ceremonies that in truth had their roots not in the Druids, but in Babylon itself.
He doesn't show this, like, he doesn't, like, you know, cite any of these things from the annals or anything, but he's wearing a shirt. He looks pretty. Yeah. I trust him.
He's hitting all the Christian scare words to me.
He does seem to be rather front-loading this, doesn't he? Somewhat? Yes. Now, maybe we can back this up. So, let's just give him a chance at the minute. And then he lists previous presidents that have been, he says, forced to go, because he says that it's a fact that you have to go if you want to be president, basically. And he's shown that Presidents Bush, Nixon, Eisenhower, Hoover, Taft, Reagan, and Clinton have all been at Bohemian Grove. And he also says that all the members of the Federal Reserve were apparently members of the Bohemian Grove. Now, if this is true, this is incredible, because basically this is really, really showing that there's at least a through line with this. And to be fair, he has shown that these people do go to the Grove, and it's starting to look rather like a convincing argument. What he does do is he acknowledges that there is previous people have been to the Grove. There was two. He says that there was a 1989 Spy magazine article that they went inside the Grove, but he says that this was obviously just a spin. Like, he suspects that this came from the Grove itself, because it doesn't mention anything like that Alex talks about. It doesn't mention anything to do with satanic rituals or anything like that. It basically implies that this is just a country club where these rich blokes go and act a bit stupid and a bit childish and, get away from it for a couple of weeks. But then he also points out that there was an article that came out in 1981 from Parade magazine, and he calls this, in his own words, the most accurate and revealing about the so-called mock human sacrifice. And he reads a paragraph that opens the article. He says, nearly 2,000 carefully selected government officials, corporate tycoons and other luminaries, men with power to shape the future, assembled secretly last July in a redwood forest about 65 miles north of San Francisco. They began with a somber ritual that featured the druidic burning of an effigy on an altar, chants from a robed chorus, and a bacchanal reminiscent of ancient Greece. This certainly seems to back up what Alex is saying, but there's some sort of chanting druid ritual. And as to say, the video that we've seen does show this. It shows people with hoods on looking not dissimilar to sort of, I don't know, it looks a bit like a metal video, to be quite honest, or or sort of an
some
early
B-roll from a Nine Inch Nails video.
Yeah, kind of. Like it is like, there's obviously some sort of ritual going on. There's a high priest, there's an altar, there's definitely a fire, there's people in robes who are in a procession, there's chanting, and as I say, there's a giant owl there.
There's dramatic effect of him walking through a forest.
But absolutely. But this isn't just Alex saying this. Alex wants to make sure that he's saying the truth. So he goes to see an expert. He goes to see Tex Mars. Now Tex Mars is an expert on the occult. And basically what he says when Alex goes to visit him, he goes to visit him because of his extensive library on the occult. And he says that front group after front group to conceal and subvert, but behind all these groups there's a small cadre of elites, a core, and what you have done with Bohemian Grove is you've exposed one of the premier organisations of the whole New World Order arrangement, you might say. Now, Jen, the New World Order is this concept that basically there's going to be a one world government, a tyrannical one world government. Some say it'll be fascist, some say it'll be communist, some say it'll be Jewish. The takeaway is it's going to be bad unless you're sort of one of the elites. It's going to be a sort of total control grid where essentially nobody's able to do anything. There'll be no freedom, especially if you wanted to be Christian. They really have it in for the Christians. Like, I don't know why, but they do. And Tex goes on, and he says, of course, we can all go back into history, all the way back to ancient Egypt, Babylon, or Greece and Rome, which I think are later, but never mind. I think you're going to see the roots of Bohemian Grove in Egypt, Babylon, ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So that's pinning it down. But anyway, he says, but particularly in the Illuminati era, originating during the French Revolutionary days, when we have the actual Illuminati with Adam Weishaupt and all of his evil philosophers, Voltaire and the others, that have all come up all the way today. Hitler, of course, was a Bohemian. Now, I'm not quite sure what that means. He's just basically saying that this idea of bohemianness has sort of fused its way through the elites throughout history. And The Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati was a real secret society. The degree to which they were successful is debated. But what he's referencing there is what some people believe to be the start of this hidden group called the Illuminati, who essentially want to control the world and want to instigate this new world order. So, Tex has clearly done his homework. It's all tying together. And he says, I think it's Babylon mystery religion. All of the elements are there. Of course, even the owl was a symbol of ancient mystery Babylon. The owl was worshipped by ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, and it's interesting to me that many of the Bohemian Grove have in their houses small figurines of owls, and I believe that they actually worship these as a symbol of a deity, the great goddess of Babylon. And then later he goes, they sort of cut it in. Basically, Tex has already seen the cremation of care, which is what the owl ritual is called. And he says, looking at this, there had to be an occultist, a deep occultist who designed each of the elements of the ceremony. It wasn't just a bunch of guys at a bar that said, hey, let's have a good time with this cremation of care. And so with that background, basically, Alex Jones meets up with John Ronson, of all people. John Ronson wrote the Psychopath Manual, many documentaries on Channel 4. Goats. Yes, Many Hysteric Goats, and various, which was obviously turned into a film later.
And a brilliant new podcast, Things Fall Apart.
Yes, very good podcast.
Amazing.
And he's done some really good stuff. His stuff on Pornhub was actually not his stuff on Pornhub. Right? That was, if anything, that was mediocre. But his stuff discussing Pornhub, that was really, really good, and it gave an insight into behind the scenes, really fascinating story. And he's also done some stuff recently. He used to be great friends with Alex Jones. They fell out because he exposed some stuff about Alex Jones's past. Apparently Alex Jones wasn't a particularly nice person at school, and apparently his story about why he had
Jen.
I'm so shocked. Sorry.
Apparently when he had to leave school, it's not for the reasons that Alex Jones has said, and maybe we'll touch on that later, if we've got time. One thing that we can confirm is when he was at school, Alex Jones was an absolute dreamboat. I don't care what anybody says. If you've seen the pictures of him as an athlete, steady on. It's such a shame, but there is.
He was not always round.
No, but there's no true beauty without decay, Brent. So Now he meets up with John Ronson, and basically somehow they get hold of a map. He doesn't explain where they've got this map, but basically they've got hold of a map that shows the sort of inside, and he's looking at it and he says, now we see here the Shrine of the Devil. They even admit its roots in Babylon, and the Druids had them and everything else. So all over the world, this weird owl shows up, and in some cultures, they throw children inside the bowels of the burning owl. So what he's talking about is, he's talking about Moloch there. He's talking about the ancient practice. He says, in fact, I was reading some of the talks that have been given and released that the Bohemian Grove have discussed, and all its population control, world courts, and we're talking 20 years ago. What he's saying here is that basically he's got hold of some of the talks that happen, because world leaders go there and influential people give talks by the lakeside, because this goes on for 2 weeks. And Alex is saying that he's read some of these and that they talk about world government, which pertains to the New World Order conspiracy theory. He doesn't show it, but, he wouldn't have made a film if he didn't know what he's talking about. So anyway. He then basically says that him and a fellow called Mike Hansen would then conducted the very first ever successful infiltration of Bohemian Grove. And that's not true, because he's already talked about 2 previous ones, but never mind. Let's strive on. 2 groups actually went inside. Alex Jones went in with Mike Hansen, and John Ronson went in with a fellow called Rick. But we'll talk about that in a bit, because we don't see them in there. We only see Mike and Alex. Now, Alex has got 2 cameras. He's got one that's hidden in his tie, and he's got one that's hidden in a pager. And the one that's hidden in a pager is the one that he's basically used to catch the majority of the thing. Now, there's several things that happen, apparently, that are quite sketchy. They didn't have any problem walking in. They just walked in, and when they were questioned, they says, we're here to see the Hillbillies. Now, the Hillbillies is one of the camps, one of the camps where people from Texas go. So the Bushes tend to go to Hillbilly, and various other people rich people from Texas go to the Hillbilly camp. And there's about 130 of these camps, and they've all got different names. Apparently Mandalay is the most exclusive, and it has its own sort of private security force there. But they say that they were questioned by sheriff's deputies, Secret Service, and the Grove's own private security force. So 3 separate security forces questioned Alex Jones, but they were able to basically charm their way out of it. He didn't get any of this on film, by the way. None of this is on film. Absolutely none of it is on film. Unfortunately,
that's what I was just going to ask. I'm sure I didn't see that actually in the video.
No, he's not in the video because unfortunately it didn't get filmed. But then what happens is they go to a secluded area and where there's a swimming sort of dock, and they stay there because they're a bit freaked out. So they decide they're going to stay there until dark. But whilst they're doing it, Alex says he gets out his camera and starts filming the surroundings. Immediately, a security guard comes up and tells him to stop filming. Again, this isn't caught on film, even though he was filming when the security guard told him to stop filming. But it wasn't caught on film, okay? And as they were going back through the woods, trying to get away from the security guard, saying, "Oh, sorry, we won't do that again," they saw in the trees huge banks of monitors with recording equipment, leading them to believe that the entire encampment is wired for sound, but potentially for blackmail or any nefarious types of reasons. Again, he doesn't catch any of this on film. There's no solid evidence or, in fact, evidence, but this is what he says. And then basically what he finds is he's got a program from the Cremation of Care. And on the front of this program, it shows the effigy being burnt in the flames. And he says that it looks like a baby. He says that the proportions of this make it look like a child. And to his mind, this tracks back to Moloch and, the sacrifice of children. And then he says that the ceremony starts and people start getting very excited about it. He says there's a lot of smacking of lips and bizarre enjoyment by the crowd. And we couldn't make out what was going on, but that a real sacrifice might have been developing, according to some occult expert. What he's saying is, after the fact, some occult experts in the occult, your common or garden occult expert, they've looked at this, and with their expertise in the occult, they've said, whoa, I think that might actually be a real sacrifice. I don't think it's an effigy. I think it might actually be a baby that's being murdered in front of everybody. And Alex backs this up. He says the bound body, that's exactly what the Druids did. They would roast cats and goats and oxen and horses and watch the pain of how they died from this and extract some sort of mystical energy, force or power, and also be able to tell the future, which is a nifty skill if you can muster it. Now, upon further research, Alex says, it's a mixture of Babylonian, Canaanite, Moloch infused with ancient druidic rites, where you have the female side of Satan, which they first call out to in the she, and then towards the horned god with the he, mixed with Masonic rites from Scotland. So, it's a hodgepodge, but it's obviously something that, this would require some sort of deep knowledge of the occult in order to mash those different things again. So just to clarify, it's a Babylonian, Canaanite, Moloch infused with ancient druidic rites, where you have the female side of Satan, which they first call out to in the she, and then towards the horned god with the he, mixed with Masonic rites from Scotland. Also, in the program that we mentioned earlier, there's a tiny little, what looks like a demon, a little horned demon, sweeping something up with PJ written on the side. And he says that this is, again, occultically significant because from Babylon to ancient England, the word bonefire, meaning human sacrifices thrown into fiery pits, turned into today's word bonfire. And after the sacrifice, the cult would sweep up the ashes of these bones and they would use them in future rituals. So they would sort of harvest these burnt sacrificial ashes and use them in rituals later. What type of rituals, he doesn't clarify. But, it doesn't sound good, does it? Now, 5 years later, Alex Jones knew that the market was ripe for a sequel. Now, to be fair to him, we are taking the mickey somewhat because it's just the style that we do it in. But, he did get in there. He did film something very, very strange. Yeah. He did observe some very, very wealthy people in there. And it's true that this is a secret event where he's got in. Now, in the meantime, basically, this exploded across the internet. John Ronson actually put out his own version of the documentary, which is more of a sort of behind the scenes, which we'll talk about later, which was called Secret Rulers of the World. This was shown on Sky One. In fact, it may have even been on Sky One that I first saw it. I think it was a program with Danny Wallace called The Illuminati that actually highlighted the ritual. And again, like me and Brent, like numerous people all over the world, it blew our minds, because this is something very, very strange that's happening with world leaders. And, you know, from my limited knowledge of the occult, if somebody's telling me, who's an expert in the occult, that this is the occult, and they're talking about it in detail, talking about how they're using the female side to represent one part of Satan and the male side to represent another part of Satan, and they can actually tie it back by an expert to ancient Babylon, I was convinced. I thought this is very, very important bit of footage. And many, many people did. And this is why Alex decided to put out a sequel called The Order of Death that came out in 2005. And he acknowledges that basically,
then in a time period between the mid-1970s and the early 1990s, scores of reporters attempted to infiltrate the Grove. All attempts were unsuccessful. Grove security identified them, threw them out for trespassing, or in some cases, had the local police arrest them.
This is just basically highlighting how incredibly special it was that Alex and Mike and John and Rick managed to get in there, and you cannot take that away from him.
All of that changed on July 15th, 2000, when we ripped aside the veil of secrecy and were successfully able to penetrate the Bohemian Grove on their high holy day and videotape the cremation of care ritual. Finally, we learned that the Grove was only one chapter in a larger, worldwide secret society hell-bent on bringing in a one-world government. What would the people do if they knew that the majority of the leaders in the corporate world, as well as government, were deep occultists? Before the year 2000 and our successful penetration of the Grove, the mainstream media denied that rituals were indeed taking place there, and said that elite from all over the world were simply meeting in secret to have a good time.
Since then, basically some of the more salacious details have got out. Now, he points to a New York Post article.
The New York Post was one of many national publications to report on all of the homosexual activities going on at the Grove. The Post reported in its page 6 gossip column that Chad Savage, gay porno star, was, quote, servicing the moguls at the Grove.
But he then shows a picture of a chap called Jeff Gannon. And what this is to do is to tie together this concept that the elites are using prostitutes and male prostitutes. Jeff Gannon was a gay escort and porn star who somehow managed to get a press pass and was able to get into the White House. His real name was actually James Gooker. And it is actually a bit of a mystery how he was able to be there so prominently in the press pack at the White House and ask questions of the president. There's a broader conspiracy regarding Jeff Gannon that he might actually be the grown-up version of a paperboy called Johnny Gosch that was kidnapped in the 1980s. And Johnny Gosch was supposedly kidnapped by a person that we're going to talk about in a little while called Paul Benassi, who was connected to another genuine conspiracy called the Franklin Savings and Loan Scandal that involved bank fraud, child prostitution, drugs, and potentially human sacrifice, as bizarre as it sounds. Anyway, he's showing this picture of Jeff Gannon so that people in the know make that connection with gay prostitutes, gay porn stars, and the elites. And he basically points out that since his film came out, it's been discussed on mainstream news, and he points to one incident of it. One of the people that says this on the news appears to be making Masonic hand signals. I mean, I don't know exactly what the symbols are, but he's doing something with his hand. Like he doesn't explain or cite which Masonic hand symbol it is. But anyway, it's not like he's throwing up the horns, like splashing like a rabbit carcass across his face or anything like that. But anywho, since then, there's been the negative pushback, but they've also met this lovely fellow called Kyle. Now, Kyle basically works at the Grove, and he's snuck out some footage, and it shows the model of the effigy, which is a skeleton, and it also shows the costumes, and it shows inside the actual owl, and the owl turns out to be sort of concrete facade, but it appears to be sort of like fiberglass inside with sort of, it's hollow essentially. So it's a prop. It's not actually a massive stone effigy. But he also points out that George Bush was there, and he's found out recently that George Bush's nickname in Skull and Bones, which was another secret society that's based out of Yale, is Magog, which occult experts have translated as Satan's warbringer. So apparently in this secret society, Skull and Bones, which is a genuine thing at Yale, George Bush Sr. is known by his mates as Satan's warbringer. And he says, in studying worldwide occult networks in modern times and history, you always run into the same data, compartmentalized pyramidal structures with a bunch of well-meaning dupes at the bottom, managers in the central area, and Luciferian adherent death cults at the top. He points out that in India it's Kali, there's the Mayans and the Aztecs, whose greatest gods were the gods of death. It was the same in Egypt and in Babylon, as well as in Rome and ancient Greece. The main gotcha of this film is he bumps into a bloke called David Gergen. Now, David Gergen actually resigned from Bohemian Grove. He was becoming an advisor to the president, so he resigned. And Alex makes a big deal about this, saying that, well, he couldn't have continued being at Bohemian Grove because if people would have found out about this. And later, David Gergen basically, when he's asked in the press, oh, you're going back to that Bohemian Club, are you? He said, yeah, I've been to the Bohemian Club, but at least I don't run around there naked.
Can I just say that, like, the context of that quote of "I don't run around naked," I feel like it's more like none of us do that, or not very many of us do that. I don't know. Yeah. That's what I get when I heard him say it.
Yeah, it certainly could be. But essentially, Alex Jones confronts him and says, I'm the person that snuck inside. Did you see the ritual? And David Gergen gets really, really cross at this, to which Alex Jones repeats the motto of the Bohemian Club, which is weaving spiders come not near. And David Gergen flips his lid and just runs away, basically. And Alex Jones seems to think like this is proof that he's caught him out in an embarrassing secret. He's gone to the Grove, and when he's mentioned the ritual, he made David Gergen go, oh, crikey, someone knows about the ritual, and he's turned tail and run. And to sort of back this up, he says, well, how widespread is the occult within elite circles? And he says that we know Nancy Reagan was into astrology, and we know that Eleanor Roosevelt was doing seances, and then we know Hitler was obsessed with the occult, and he was a member of the secret societies, the Fool Society and the Thule Society, which have links to Skull and Bones coming from the German Order of Death secret society. He also tells a story about Tony Blair. Apparently every morning Tony Blair gets up, draws a circle, and prays to this entity that he calls the light. And through that, he almost sort of channels what he's going to do with the day. And, you know, this is what Alex says. He also points out...
I remember that story coming out.
Yeah.
Before I was a conspiracist. Like hearing about Tony Blair. And did you know what he wore around his neck?
No.
A necklace of her toenail clippings.
Oh.
That was part of some ritual. It was actually in mainstream media.
Well, there you go. Well, this is the point. This speaks to Alex's concern, doesn't it? He points out that Aleister Crowley was friends with the royals. And he says the Church of Satan, the Temple of Set, the OTO, the Golden Dawn, Skull and Bones, Freemasonry, all denominations of the same religion, the Egyptian Babylonian mystery schools. He also points out that Albert Pike, the supreme Grand Mason of the entire world, founded the KKK. And despite this fact, they won't remove his statue. And other prominent Masons who happen to be black, like Jesse Jackson, they won't bring up the fact that Albert Pike started the Ku Klux Klan, because this will basically look bad with their fraternity brothers. Now, the next time that Alex Jones mentioned Bohemian Grove was not until about 2020, when he appeared on Joe Rogan. Now, to be fair to Alex, by the time that he'd actually started talking about Bohemian Grove, he'd gone through at least an entire bottle of whiskey. And not one of those little bottles of whiskey either. Like, he seems to have an amazing capacity for, like, whacking back, like, hard spirits. And, like, in a grudging way, I have to sort of, like, you know, respect that. One of the people that goes there that he actually likes is Clint Eastwood. So he's kind of changed his tune a bit. He's like, well, not everyone that goes there is bad, because Clint Eastwood goes there, and Clint Eastwood's all right, isn't he? He explains it to Joe. He says it's 2,000 acres. It was set up by Mark Twain, and it was a liberal deal for hookers and gay guys. And if you go back to the 1870s, when Mark Twain set it up, it was partying and gay dudes and saloons and female hookers. It was Bohemian Grove. You can do what you want. Sounds like Reading Festival. It sounds all right. Like, when Taft was president,
yeah, exactly,
Republicans bought it, and they have a lot of gay sex, and it's used to compromise people and induct them into the Luciferian cult. And Jones claims he was hit on when he went to Bohemian Grove. He says that, like, back then I was slim and I was handsome. Not as handsome as when he was at school. Trust me on that one. But he was hit on by loads and loads of people when he went to Bohemian Grove. He's never mentioned this before, but, like, apparently that's the truth. And he also said that when he was watching the cremation of Care, they were taking it really seriously. He apparently said to one of them, "Wow, this is really cool, isn't it?" And the bloke turned around and said, "Shut up, or I'll kill you." And so apparently they were taking it really, really seriously. And he also repeats the fact that the effigy, although it was an effigy, it was designed specifically to look like a child. He also says that he's shown the ritual to experts. You know, these are cult experts. And they say that it's a Faustian deal mixed with Babylonian and religious stuff from Tyre. And Tyre is ancient Phoenicia. So this is what he now believes it is. He says that he heard about it from Ted Gunderson. He also claims that he saw Danny Glover there. You know, when Danny Glover was in the first Lethal Weapon film, when he was too old for this shit, right? He was 38 years old. Like he's younger than I am now. It's not fair, is it?
He said all this on a TI interview, didn't he?
Yeah, because this is the Joe Rogan experience. He also discussed it with Adam Schultz as well. But he says at 1900, Skull and Bones, which is a death cult, took over Bohemian Grove, and that's why they set it up as the central hub of the Luciferian New World Order. And he claims that Skull and Bones forces gay sex, and that leftism is actually, it's a metaphor for left-hand path Satanism. He also claims that Helmut Schmidt, who was a Chancellor of Germany, wrote in his autobiography, Men in Power, and I quote, "I love our Illuminati rituals that we have in Germany, in our own secret groves, but they have taken it to a new level with Skull and Bones and Bohemian Grove," which is, wow, that's pretty damning. He also says that John Ronson, when he was at Bohemian Grove, saw a large photograph in one of the dining rooms, and it was a picture of Henry Kissinger wearing a dress, turned around with his fingers. I don't know quite how to put this delicately. Well, you'd have to put it delicately. Now, that's what Alex Jones claimed on the Joe Rogan show. And then he went on to the Adam Schultz show. Now, one of the things that he says that we haven't mentioned is that the Manhattan Project, which is the project to start the atomic bomb, the hydrogen bomb, and moving on to the atomic bomb. And the concept for the project was started at Bohemian Grove, which is another sort of indication that this is really crazy. But Alex somewhat changes his story about why and how he was there. He said that he was paid to sneak in. This is on the Adam Schultz Flagrant 2 podcast. "I was paid to sneak in by a British broadcasting group, not BBC, but World of Wonder with Channel 4, because they didn't want the liability. They had the passcodes, and they actually could help get me in through the Secret Service. And that's how I was able to get in. I had to sign an NDA. I signed an agreement to sneak in with a hidden camera and get footage. But this was 20 years ago. I wasn't into Satanism or paedophilia. I thought that was just bullshit. I was a mainline Republican pro-gun guy, but I'd already snuck onto military bases and got footage, so they said, well, why don't you go in?" And now he's sort of questioning that, wondering whether he was potentially let in on purpose. But the main takeaway is that Alex Jones now thinks that actually real Satanism goes on in the woods in Bohemian Grove, and they coerce men to have gay sex in order to blackmail them and or bribe them into deals and policy and stuff like that. And you have to go there if you want to be president. But basically, he thinks that John Ronson was allowed in by Secret Service, and they gave some sort of secret code. Now, the next time that Bohemian Grove was brought up was by a gentleman called Paul Bonassi. Now, Paul Bonassi is connected to a case called the Franklin Savings and Loan Scandal. This is where it starts to get a little bit grim, I'm afraid. Now, in 1988, Lawrence King, who was an aide to the Republican Party, was convicted of defrauding the Franklin Credit Union for £14 million. Essentially, there was this credit union in Nebraska connected to a children's charity, and he was found to have stolen $40 million from this place by the IRS and the FBI. Now, investigation showed that actually they were taking children out of the Boys Town children's home, and they were using them as prostitutes, and there was evidence of a paedophile ring to entrap politicians and businessmen with children from Boys Town, and this is both boys and girls. And apparently King would set up the party with drugs and children. In 1986, this was reported to the head of Boytown, and there was an internal investigation that showed that basically the same names were coming up again and again and again, but nothing was done about it. And in 1988, this was again reported to social services that King was abusing children, and nothing was done because the report named local elite figures, including policemen, a local millionaire called Alan Baer, and a journalist called Peter Citron. And in 1988, the FBI actually questioned the abused children. And an investigation was set up by a senator called Lawrence Schmidt. But he very, very quickly said that the investigation was being hampered by the local police. Now, there were three main witnesses. One was called Paul Benassi, and he was actually abused several times and used to lure other children. And he essentially was a bit older, so he'd act cool, and he'd go to playgrounds and he'd say, come to these parties, and he'd lure children away, and they would be later abused. There was a chap called Troy Bonner, and there was a girl called Alicia Owens. And Alicia Owens basically said that she was repeatedly abused by the chief of police for Omaha, Nebraska. There was also a gentleman called Gary Caradori, who interviewed both Paul Benassi and Rusty Nelson, and this is where Bohemian Grove comes into it, because Rusty Nelson was a photographer that was connected to Larry King, so he was definitely involved with this circle of people. He claims that snuff films and child pornography was regularly being filmed, and he didn't film it, but he knows the person that does film it, and at one time he was offered $100,000 by the gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson to film a snuff film. Now, Gary Caradori, who conducted these interviews, wound up dead in a mysterious plane crash that also sadly killed his 8-year-old son. And just after that, this went to a grand jury, and mysteriously, Troy Bonner went completely back on his testimony, and Alicia Owens and Paul Benassi were called liars. There was a second grand jury where Troy Bonner was then going to basically recount his recanting and was going to tell his original story of abuse. But he just never turned up. And there's a documentary that came out called Conspiracy of Silence, in which he says that he ran away from the whole scene because he was terrified of being murdered. Alicia Owens was given 25 years for perjury, which some see as being rather excessive and very potentially a warning to other children that might come forward. Now, Paul Benassi's story of this snuff film is incredibly graphic. There are transcripts of it online. I won't go into all the details, but I'm going to have to go into some. Now, basically, he was flown to this grove in the middle of California. He was dropped off in Sacramento, and they were driven somewhere north of San Francisco. And he mentioned to Senator John DeCamp that when this snuff film was being filmed, there was a giant stone owl next to them. And John DeCamp didn't mention that in his statement because he felt that was too fanciful, that was stupid. And at the time, he'd never heard of Bohemian Grove. So he thought, I'm not telling that in the story. But years later, it came out that in the first telling of this story, Paul Benassi said that he was by an owl when this happened. Essentially, him and a boy called Nicholas were made to have sex with a younger boy. The younger boy was then raped by older gentlemen. All of them were beaten up. The younger boy was then shot and dismembered, and the children were forced to have sex with the dismembered corpse. This is the story that was told by Paul Benassi, and he's never recanted on his tale. Now, Paul Benassi was actually, although the grand jury completely failed, Paul Benassi actually won a civil case and was awarded over $1 million. And in this civil case, it essentially vindicated him, saying that what he'd said was true. Now, civil case, the burden of proof is far less, but it is certainly true that in the civil case, Paul Benassi was found to have been telling the truth. So that is, I'm afraid, one of the more darker stories concerning Bohemian Grove. Now, David Icke, he says that sacrifices go on in the forests of Bohemian Grove all through the entire summer period, basically. It's particularly in the July encampment there. And he told John Ronson that if you go to the Bohemian Grove at the right time, you can see the reptilians transforming back into their lizard form whilst they sacrifice children. Now, how regular that is, I don't know. But that's apparently what David Icke says. And to support this, the idea that there's this owl worship with the elites, he points out two things. One, he spotted an owl in the street map of Washington, D.C., and it appears to be the outline of an owl with the Congress building right in its stomach. And it's there. It is. It's definitely on the map. There is an owl. You can't deny that. He also basically shows this ancient Mesopotamian relief. It's called the Burney relief. And it shows a woman with sort of clawed feet and wings. And she's stood there and she's got sort of like a horned crown. And there's several owls and I believe lions at her feet. And what he says this is the goddess of Babylon. And he shows this as proof that the elites have worshipped this owl throughout history. For a while, Bohemian Grove was kind of quiet. I'd not heard of this. Brent told me about the story of Richard McCaslin. This is one of those things where at the start you think, oh, this is going to be a laugh. This is going to be wacky. This is going to be a bit of fun. And at the end of it, you come out just feeling incredibly depressed about the entirety of the human race. So it's very much like Mrs. Brown's Boys in that regard. Richard McCaslin is a gentleman that was a real-life superhero. He fell into some toxic waste. No. Right. In 1985, he started patrolling in a full costume, Zanesville, Ohio, as superhero The Lynx. And it was a bit of a sad story. He had one really good friend and his friend died. And they were both really into comic books and really into superheroes. And he draws comics and he just loves everything about comics. And he wanted to become a superhero. So when his friend died, he convinced the 15-year-old younger brother of his friend to join him on the streets of Zanesville, Ohio, and fight crime. Now, I know you're thinking this all sounds a bit dangerous and a bit sort of like, perhaps a little irresponsible, but it was perfectly okay because the teenage lad, Ironclaw, as he went, had homemade Wolverine blades. Apparently razor sharp, made out of iron, which is why it was called Ironclaw. So there was really no suggestion that they would come to any harm. He would stab anybody before that happened. So this didn't go on for very long, and eventually McCaslin became a Marine and was actually guarding nuclear weapons for a time during his service. When he finished the Marines, he went to stuntman school and he became a Batman performer at Six Flags Astroworld, which is like a Disneyland, but a different sort of place.
Like Alton Towers.
Like a sort of big Alton Towers,
It's
basically.
in Houston, in Texas. It's actually like across the street from where Travis Scott held Astroworld.
Oh, hang
Another
on.
conspiracy, that.
Which
There's
could be a future episode.
There's no way you're telling me that's a coincidence, Brent. Anyway. So he was a Batman performer at Astroworld. Now, in 2001, he started stalking a country and western singer called Shelley Wright. He basically paid a huge amount of money to go on a date with this lady, and he believed that she liked him a lot more than just being polite. So he started turning up to a lot of her concerts and getting front row tickets and making her feel rather nervous about the whole situation, and was eventually arrested for stalking. In 2002, he became a new superhero called Phantom Patriot, and he'd become enamored in in two things. One, Alex Jones's Bohemian Grove film, but also David Icke and his concepts of the reptilians. And so he became convinced that Bohemian Grove, there was actual reptilians in there, reptilian aliens, or the elites of the world, who are in reality reptilian aliens, and they were sacrificing children in there. And so he decided that he was going to dress as the Phantom Patriot, take a shotgun, a handgun, a sword, and a machete, and he was going to break in there and kill all the reptilians. And on the way, he stopped off to check in with Alex Jones to sort of ask advice about this. Now, we don't know exactly what happened in this conversation, but he definitely spoke to Alex Jones before he went to Bohemian Grove. Now, his costume is brilliant. His costume is absolutely brilliant. It's really, really well made. He obviously has an eye for aesthetics, and he knows about superheroes. His planning was shite. He turned up in the middle of the night and he realised that he hadn't bought any spare batteries for his torch. And so after about 20 minutes, he was wandering around in the dark. He didn't find any lizards, but he did manage to find one of the huts, and he broke into a hut and sort of stayed the night. The next day, he basically looked around, he found the owl, and he tried to burn the owl down, but discovered it wasn't flammable. So he set fire to a dining hall, and this set off the sprinklers, and security came, got into a bit of a standoff, but he decided not to shoot anybody, and then he was sent to prison for many, many years, where he stayed in the mental health section. When he came out, what is fascinating is he wrote a comic detailing his experiences of how he was trying to search for the reptiles. And he never, ever gave up on his thought that Bohemian Grove is a hotbed of reptilian activity. He just obviously got there on the wrong week, unfortunately. Later, in 2011, he changed his name to Thought Crime, a new superhero entity, and campaigned to try and make the world aware that President Obama was one of these reptilian aliens. And then, unfortunately, in 2018, he killed himself outside of a Masonic temple. And that sort of ends the rather sort of sad story of Richard McCaslin. As I said, it's one of these things where it sounds kind of wacky and crazy, but this guy was lonely and he was clearly mentally ill. And he's got some talent. He's got some talent in design. He's got some talent in storytelling. He's got some talent in artwork. His comics aren't publishable. They're very nearly. Like, his sort of concept was incredible. And the design of his characters was astonishing. Like, really, really good. And it's just really sad, again, that this person was obviously looking for some sort of direction, some sort of like something to latch onto in life. And he wasn't able to get that with comics. And he sort of latched onto the reptilians and this idea of Bohemian Grove. And like, I think essentially it's very sad. I think he was a very lonely person that was looking to be somebody special and
looking to make a change in this world.
Exactly.
Did you say he passed away in 2018?
I believe so, yeah.
So that's from 2002 to 2018, which is very similar to my own journey, 2003 to 2018. But yeah. I'm so surprised, like when I heard this story, when I came out of the rabbit hole, I'd never heard of this guy.
No.
In all the time that I was a truther. I never heard of a man who broke into Bohemian Grove with all these weapons, to take down the elite, because we would have raised him as a hero if we had known about it.
That Alex Jones doesn't mention this in order of death, because it happened in between the two Alex Jones films, and it's bizarre that David Icke has never mentioned this, seeing as he's acted off the back of direct quotes from David Icke.
But is it bizarre? Because does it implement them?
I mean,
doesn't make them look good to me.
It's not a good look, is it?
No. Again, it's one of these things where sometimes if you're happy to take the sort of congratulations, sometimes you have to hold yourself up and say, yeah, fair enough. Like, you have a power of influence, and sometimes that's going to go wrong, and you need to be held accountable for that in the same way that you need to be praised if you've exposed something that is helpful to the world. I don't for a second think that Alex Jones or David Icke want people to get hurt. I just don't think that they think through to the consequences. The counter argument is if you've got a large enough argument, like Jodie Foster, there was a time where people thought that Jodie Foster was the reason that that bloke tried to kill Reagan. You can hardly blame Jodie Foster for that. But this is slightly different because you are extolling the idea that this is a worldview. Jodie Foster has never got up and said, the world would be better if Ronald Reagan took two in the chest. But Alex Jones and David Icke have said that sacrifices are going on by the elites in these redwood forests. I think it's just horrible. I think the whole thing is just very, very sad, basically. Right, what we're going to do now, Jen, is we're just going to go whip back through that and go and tell you about the actual truth about Bohemian Grove.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're going to go back and debunk all of this, because I'm thoroughly disturbed. I mean, the snuff movie thing is just absolutely disturbing as hell.
I left quite a lot out about that. I left.
I'm glad you did, because I couldn't. But I'm like so oversensitive. Right, continue, please.
Okay, so if we remember Alex Jones, going back to Dark Secrets in Bohemian Grove, he starts off by very heavily front-loading it. He says that it's a bizarre Canaanite, Luciferian, Babylonian mystery religion ceremony. Now, as you pointed out, Canaanite is pre-Hebrew, and it actually has many gods, including, I believe, Yahweh, the God of the Bible. I don't know whether they consider him God, but essentially that's different to Luciferian. Luciferianism is different to Satanism. Satanism doesn't believe in it, is essentially atheist. Luciferianism believes in a physical Satan, but also a physical God. It just believes that Lucifer is right and that he's, if anything, got some bad press. Now, Babylonian was also pre-Christian, and it's got many gods. But the important point to take away is that basically, that's a word salad. These are three completely different things. What he's saying is bad, bad, bad. In fact, if you really want to get down to it, what he's saying is not Christian, not Christian, not Christian.
Yeah.
This is the problem that I had immediately going back and watching this, is that he's really, really front-loading it. He does point out some sort of things. Those pictures are absolutely genuine. The presidents do meet there. Reagan was there. The Bushes were there. Newt Gingrich, Eisenhower, Herbert Hoover, and people like Art Linklater and, important luminaries. That is absolutely 100% true.
But you missed off a name there.
You're absolutely right. He mentions Clinton, and he also mentions Jimmy Carter. And he points out that if you want to be the president, you need to go to Bohemian Grove. And that's not true. It's just not true. Clinton has never been to the Bohemian Grove. Jimmy Carter has never been to the Bohemian Grove. Obama, President Truman, President Roosevelt, JFK, Lyndon Johnson, Woodrow Wilson, none of those presidents ever went to the Bohemian Grove. Reagan went, Eisenhower went, Bush Sr. went, Bush Jr. went. That's absolutely 100% true. But for whatever reason, Alex wants you to think that Clinton and certain Democrats are also involved in that. This is not to say that no Democrats go, but Clinton and Carter, they would never, ever been mentioned, I'm afraid. Now, immediately we're off to a bit of a bad start, because when he talks about Moloch, he says, remember, there's the 40-foot stone owl, and it's Moloch, and he's looked at it in the Old Testament in Leviticus, which, if you remember, is in the Bible. He talks about the story of children being thrown into the belly of Moloch. Now, there is a bit of a problem with this, in as much as Moloch was not an owl.
No.
Moloch was a bull. And so I think I've found the source of where he's got that from, but we shall come to that later. But all you need to know for now is that that's just not accurate. He's just framing it in such a way that basically he's trying to say, this thing that I think is bad, there's a thing that is bad. I think we can all agree, sacrificing your firstborn to a large bull deity, it's not brilliant, is it?
Right. Not great parenting, is it?
No, it's not, is it? But this is the point. He's trying to make that association between the two, and unfortunately, that association just isn't real.
And he's still saying it today.
He is still saying
He's still saying it's Moloch the owl, and it's not Moloch the owl at all. This is the thing that I had the problem with when I started actually researching a lot of this much more deeply. First, obviously, I was into the political conspiracies and Freemasons and stuff like that. But when I started getting into Anunnaki or ancient mythologies and all that sort of stuff, I started understanding hold on, that's not Moloch. Moloch is a bull, not an owl. The owl could be many, many other things, but it's not this one. It seems to be that you're just saying Moloch because it's an evil Canaanite deity in the Bible.
Yeah.
Just to appeal to his audience.
You pointed out, though, he totally missed a trick with this one, hasn't he?
He did. The big trick here is it's an owl, and there's another ancient secret society who has the owl as their logo, and it was Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati. They had the Owl of Athena as their logo. Why didn't he just say that? It's the Illuminati goddess. No, he didn't do that because he needed to appeal to his Christian audience.
But didn't he also say that if he'd have sort of known a bit more about this, he could have tied the owl to Lilith? Explain who Lilith is. Lilith is Adam's first wife, or sometimes considered a demon, is she, or essentially?
Yeah, in Genesis 1, God makes man and woman equal. He makes them both. And then in Genesis 2, he makes Adam and Eve. So the ancient Jewish people questioned, well, what did that mean? Why is he making man and woman and then he makes Adam and Eve in the next book? Doesn't make sense. So they pondered this thing and they came up with this idea of Lilith. Adam and Lilith were made equally, both made out of dirt the same way that Adam is made. But Lilith was made to be subservient, just like Eve was. And she said to God, well, why should I be subservient? I'm made out of the exact same material as him.
Girl power.
Exactly, right? Ancient feminism. This is probably why they don't like feminism.
You don't say.
Anyway, God then kicks Lilith out of Eden, makes Eve out of Adam's rib. She is made out of him, therefore she is subservient to him. And Lilith is meant to stalk the darkness like pestilence and become this demon queen. So in the ancient Judaic mythology, Lilith is now like the demon queen. So that could have been a perfect thing. And she gets, in ancient like depictions, linked with an owl.
Right. So there's two perfectly plausible, or, you know, at least sort of accurate representations of an owl that have got a connection to esoteria and potentially even sort of, you know, broader Illuminati conspiracy theories that he's just totally missed because he needs to tie it back to the Old Testament, which I think gives an indication right off the bat of what the problem with Alex Jones's investigation is. He's slanting it, he's framing it, he's totally decided before he's gone in there what he's going to find, and that is essentially what he's found. He goes on to say they started it because they wanted to place away from the so-called backwardness of the West Coast and the Judeo-Christian ethic, and that their annals even admit an obsession with the occult and what they call Druid rituals. And this is just simply not true. Like, the annals are out there. I found the Bohemian Grove annals. Since 1900, they've been publishing the annals, which detail who's a member, what's been going on that year, what the plays are that year. We'll explain this a bit more later, but they're called jinks, high jinks and low jinks, comedies or sort of Grecian plays, essentially. And these transcripts, including the transcripts of the cremation of Care, have been available since 1915 and earlier. But nowhere in these annals that I was looking through was anything saying that they were obsessed with Druid rituals. And again, he doesn't actually show any evidence for this. And when he says, like, you know, it's got its roots in Babylon itself, there's just no evidence that he brings up for this. Furthermore, we spoke about the sort of thing that we said about the presidents having to go there, which is not true. He also basically lied and said the Federal Reserve members are all members of the Bohemian Grove. Again, not a single member of the Federal Reserve has ever showed up on any list connected to the Bohemian Grove. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not members, but there's no evidence that they're members. Now, if we remember, he acknowledged that there was two articles, 1989 Spy magazine, but there was also the 1981 Parade magazine, which he described as the most accurate and revealing about the so-called mock human sacrifice. And you remember he read this paragraph. Nearly 2,000 carefully selected government officials, corporate tycoons and other luminaries, men with power to shape the future, assembled secretly last July in a redwood forest about 65 miles north of San Francisco. They began with a somber ritual that featured the druidic burning of an effigy on an altar, chants from a robed chorus and a bacchanal reminiscent of ancient Greece. Now, if he'd have read the next paragraph, it wouldn't have been quite the strong piece of evidence that he suggests it is. Now, he must have read the next paragraph because the start of it is on the screen. And remember, Alex Jones says that this is the most accurate and revealing about the so-called mock human sacrifice. Now, I don't want to suggest that Alex Jones is lying or exaggerating, but he appears to be exaggerating through his teeth, the exaggerating bastard. The next paragraph.
The participants of this strange ceremony were not part of a secret conspiracy or far-out cult that had infiltrated the nation's power structure. They were simply enjoying a midsummer frolic at the world's most exclusive summer camp.
Why do you think Alex Jones might have left that paragraph out? Because it completely changes the tone of the previous paragraph. But if you remember, I was saying that he was rather front-loading that. I was foreshadowing our eventual conclusion there. So anyway, we remember that he goes to see Tex Mars, and Tex says a lot of stuff. He talks about this Bohemian Grove being exposed as the premier organisations of the whole New World Order arrangement. And of course, you can go back in history all the way back to ancient Greece, Babylon, or Rome, and I think you're going to see the roots of this in Bohemian Grove. And like, to a degree, he's right about the Greece stuff. Like, in as much as basically, we'll come on to this and elaborate this, right? Some people are going to be listening to this, right, okay, now and saying, oh, what? You just say it's rubbish and Alex is lying. Stick with us. We're going to explain the whole thing, okay? But essentially, it's not Babylonian. They might have touches of Greece and stuff like that because it's about plays, but we'll come on to that in a little bit. When he says I think it's a Babylon mystery religion. All the elements are there. Of course, even the owl was a symbol of ancient mystery Babylon. The owl was worshipped by the ancient Egyptians and Babylonians, and it's interesting to me that many of the Bohemian Grove have in their homes small figurines of owls, and I believe that they actually worship these as a symbol of a deity, the great goddess of Babylon. There was no great goddess of Babylon. That's totally fictional. Right? Mm-hmm. How the hell would Tex Mars know what's in Bohemian Grover's house? And how would he know that they worship these supposed imaginary hypothetical owls as deities? Furthermore, the Egyptians and Babylonians didn't worship owls. There's no great goddess of Babylon depicted as an owl. It's just nonsense. The Egyptians, for example, had many gods, Horus, Anubis, lots. Snakes, yeah.
Horus was a hawk or a falcon?
Yeah. And, Anubis was a dog and stuff like that. And there might be an owl smattering there and here and there maybe, but like the idea that they worshipped an owl as a deity, which is pretty vital in setting up the rest of the film, is just nonsense. And what he says is that there had to be an occultist, a deep occultist, who designed each of the elements of the ceremony. This is good. It wasn't just a bunch of guys at a bar that said, hey, let's have a good time with this cremation of care. I hate to say this, right, because this sounds desperately simple, but yes, it was. It was exactly that. That was exactly what it was. It was a bunch of writers and, for want of a better phrase, ponzers, people who are into the arts and stuff like that, that decided that what they wanted to do was do something that was reminiscent of Shakespeare and also reminiscent of ancient Greece and something a bit classy to start the weekend before they got into all the drinking and pissing on trees and getting their willies out and things like that. So
thankfully, we've got a trained actor with us.
I know what they're like. These people.
There we go. Now, where did they get the map from? We'll explain where they got the map from earlier, but that was a massive sort of bone of contention. Right? They don't show that in the film. They just show Alex with the map. But that map caused one or two arguments. Alex says, in fact, I was reading some of the talks that they've given and realised that the Bohemian Grove has discussed it all. Population control, world court, so we're talking 20 years ago. No such documents exist. Or if they do exist, I haven't seen them. Alex hasn't shown them. They're not in the annals. They're not in the sort of official sort of library as far as I can see. Alex appears to be, and I'm going to choose my words really carefully, making this shit up.
Are the lakeside chats available in the annals?
No, not all of them. Some of them are.
So to be fair, he could be talking about that, but how would he have read them?
Well, this is the point.
Yeah.
This is the point.
I just debunked myself.
No, it's a fair question. And say this is the point. We want to give these things an absolutely fair whack. So
this is something I really believed in. So I do want to delve into what is the truth about it.
Absolutely. And again, don't be disheartened because there is some horribleness that is real. So stick with it. So he says that me and Mike are going to be the first ever successful infiltration of Bohemian Grove. You'll come to find later on. In fact, you'll come to find out right now that's not true. Somebody broke in 1981. Somebody broke in 1989. Somebody broke in the early 90s. Somebody broke in the 70s. And various other publications have been shown since then. In fact, in 1981, Bohemian Grove was shown on the news.
Now a question. What have Herbert Hoover, Art Linkletter, Jack London, and Richard Nixon all had in common? Well, they've all been members of the exclusive all-male Bohemian Club in California, where every year at this time, the elite from around the country get together for 2.5 weeks of fun and games. Steve Shepard has this special assignment report.
More than 2,000 members of San Francisco's exclusive and all-male Bohemian Club have once again descended on Northern California. These men will spend most of the month of July encamped on some 2,700 acres of pristine and privately owned redwood forest. Forest very much like this. The place is called Bohemian Grove, and it's located just 80 miles north of San Francisco. The Grove is the Bohemian Club's summer retreat, and its facilities are hidden beneath lush forest canopy extending south from the banks of Sonoma County's Russian River. For more than a century, the camp has been a place where club members and guests from all across America gather to relax. The retreat is divided into dozens of small camps, the most prominent of which is called Mandalay. Among its members are businessmen like Leonard Firestone and Edgar Kaiser, and political figures like Gerald Ford, Henry Kissinger, William French Smith, and George Shultz. President Reagan, Vice President Bush, and Defense Secretary Weinberger are members of other camps. Richard Nixon is a Bohemian, and so are high-ranking executives of such companies as Eastern Airlines, Standard Oil of Indiana, and Bank of America. For the most part, the men of Bohemian Grove are over 50, highly successful, and, according to many employees, politically conservative.
So several confrontations were not caught on tape. I think we all established pretty early on that Alex Jones is lying. And I know he's lying. You know when he said that basically, we were approached by all these different people and we just casually told them, we're from a hillbilly camp. We're the Grovers. We're fine. That's not true, because the actual story of what happened in Bohemian Grove was told by John Ronson in two sources, the book They and Secret Rulers of the World. And Alex Jones abandoned the plan straight away and ran through the forest, giving himself terrible poison oak poisoning. And they didn't go through the official gates at all. Rick and John Ronson did. They walked up and just basically said hello to the security guard, got into a chat with the security guard, got on the Bohemian Grove bus and went in. Alex Jones went in, bumped into John Ronson once, was so terrified of the whole place that they went off and hid. So the next bit is kind of true. When he says, we went off into a secluded part of the forest, they stayed there for about 4 hours waiting for it to go dark because they were terrified of the encampment, basically.
They gave themselves the willies.
Yeah, they wound themselves up. Now, the next bit, where he says, I got my camera out and started filming. We know this is true. This is untrue. It's a complete lie on two counts. One, from 1980s documents where other people have broken into the Grove or spoken to Grove members, it's been very clear that cameras are completely forbidden. So if you had a camera, were caught with a camera inside there, you'd be immediately kicked out, particularly when they found out that you weren't supposed to be there in the first place. Maybe George Bush might get away with it once or twice, but the rules are no cameras. We also know this is not true because Alex says, I got the camera out and started filming. It was a pager camera. So the idea that he was spotted on CCTV and then approached and told to stop filming is a complete fabrication. We know that just by looking at the facts surrounding what type of camera he had and the rules of the club. Now we get to the actual the ceremony. And again, we're going to discuss the ceremony in some detail, what it actually is later. But again, he's basically all this nonsense about, some occult experts say that it's a real sacrifice going on. What occult experts? I'm assuming he's talking about Tex Mars there. But unfortunately, it was proven, well, not proven, but in the second film, we got to see the effigy, which strongly shows that basically it was an effigy. It wasn't a real person.
Yeah, I watched this. I watched this the other day, and I was very humored by his description of it. He called it a skeletal frame. I thought, you mean a metal frame?
Yeah.
Like, you're just saying skeletal just to make it sound more like bones.
An eldritch skeletal frame. Yeah.
Such an idiot.
But the thing, this is the point that we're seeing, is like, there's a lot of framing and looking at it through a lens. Whether he's done that on purpose to hype it up or whether he's done that because he's hyped himself up, I could believe either. I was thinking that. Believe that he thinks that he's accurate. He thinks that what he's witnessing is coded or symbolized or whatever. And even though it might not be as overtly evil as it looks, he thinks that there's an undercurrent, and this is indicative of the things that he knows, which is that the elites conduct these sort of satanic rituals and stuff like that.
Like when you were just saying about him kind of freaking himself out, when we watched that, did we pick up on his fear and that, like, drew us in even more?
Essentially. I mean, this is the thing. It's still an impressive film. There's a lot of filler in it. There's a huge amount of filler in it. But, he is breaking into an elite encampment, and he's filming something very, very strange. His citations that it's satanic or Luciferian or that it's a Canaanite deity are all bang wrong. They're just wrong. He's got the information wrong. But then he gets into all this crap saying that basically, this is where you have the ancient druidic rites, where you have the female side of Satan, which they first call out to in the she, then towards the horn god with the he mixed with Masonic rites from Scotland. And that's just made up. He's just literally pulled that out of his arse. And he's trying to just so what have we got on film? We've got a conversation between an owl and a person and a disembodied voice, and then there's a fire and some screams. And that to me looks dodgy, is what he's saying. So he's trying to sort of lay it on and say, well, it's a bit like this, it's a bit like this, and it's a bit like this. But fundamentally, he debunks himself, because it can't be a Canaanite, Babylonian, Egyptian, Luciferian, Druid thing, because they're all completely separate things. Now, PJ, that little demon that he's talking about, where he's talking about the bonfire being bonfires from human sacrifices on the cover of the pamphlet, yeah. Like, that's apparently not true. Bonfire doesn't come from pagan bonfires. That was a later smearing of the pagan religion by Christians. It does come from bonfire, but it's not until the bubonic plague. So it's not this ancient human sacrifice thing. The etymology of that word is actually coming from the burning of the bones from plague victims. And there's absolutely no evidence. I don't know of anything where they sweep up the ashes and put it in. Like, that sounds like, again, Hammer horror shit to me. But yeah, we'll go on. Then he goes on to Order of Death, where he basically intimates that they've broken in on their high holy day. The cremation of care is their ritual for their religion. And there's no evidence to suggest that at all. Like, what it is it's a jinx, it's a play. Basically, we'll come on to that in a bit. We'll let John Ronson explain that, because he was there and he witnessed it. So we don't want to, we want to use source evidence. So the first sort of thing of any note is to talk about Chad Savage, who's the gay porn star apparently going to Bohemian Grove. Now, first off, this is from the gossip column of the New York Post, which is not the most reliable paper, and the gossip column is not the most reliable part of any paper. Now, Chad Savage was a gay porn star. Now, maybe he did go there because they do have prostitutes there. They have prostitutes go to Monte Rio. There's hundreds of female prostitutes flock there because there's loads of rich men, and these rich men tend to like prostitutes. This is true. There is prostitutes that service the Bohemian Grove. Even in sort of early stories of it, there's talk of homosexual activity going on inside the Grove. So if prostitutes go there, it's not unheard of for porn stars to act as high-class escorts. Yeah. It's entirely plausible that Chad Savage has been there. But I would add onto that, so?
Yes, exactly.
So what? And again, like when he goes, oh, it's gay porn stars and gay prostitutes being shipped in like beluga caviar. What's the big deal? Yeah, what is the big deal? Yeah. Is it sleazy? Yeah. Is it sleazy? Yeah, absolutely. Is it probably a bit dishonest? Are there probably going to be some politicians who are either gay or don't mind indulging in homosexual activity now and again for a bit of fun? Yeah, probably. And might some people see that as dishonest if they're presenting themselves as a family person? Yeah, potentially. But I don't actually care about it. There's nothing wrong with being gay. That seems to me to be speaking towards the potential audience who would find homosexuality to be either abhorrent or a sin.
Exactly.
Which, again, to me speaks to him trying to frame this in a Christian light. This is what it is. It's an anti-Christian place, and that's why there's something wrong with it. He then talks about Magog, the nickname for George H.W. Bush in Skull and Bones. That's true, actually. His nickname was Magog. Magog means little devil. Now, if you actually look into Skull and Bones, again, Skull and Bones is very dodgy, very sort of like elitist, not something that I'm fond of by any stretch of the imagination, but it doesn't mean Satan's Warbringer. That's completely made up. I suspect he's got that from his occult expert, Tex Mars. What it means is little devil. Now, Magog is a nickname that's used over and over again. Essentially, what it means is top shagger. It means little devil. That's more horrifying than any concept of Satanism. The idea that George H.W. Bush is a top shagger, that makes my blood run cold. Like, it's just, yeah, it's ridiculous. Like, but then again,
did you say what the little devil on the pamphlet meant?
I don't know. Nobody knows what it means.
Do you know what I think it is?
Yeah,
the artist's signature.
I think he probably is as well. It's some sort of thing. It's like a little comedic thing with PJ in it. Yeah. But again, these are artists. It's making a massive, massive assumption to go, oh, that's proof of some sort of satanic conspiracy, essentially, or that's indicative of some sort of conspiracy. He then basically goes through a load of nonsense, because like you're talking about at the bottom, there's managers, and at the top of these essential areas, there's always Luciferian adherent death cults at the top. And it's like, hang on, we're just saying scary stuff now, because I thought it was Babylonian. He then contradicts that completely by saying, well, in India it was Kali, the Mayans and the Aztecs' greatest gods were the gods of death, and it was the same in Egypt and in Babylon, as well as in Rome and ancient Greece. And none of this is true at all. It's just nonsense. The Aztecs' main god was Quetzalcoatl, who actually opposed human sacrifice, apparently. The Mayan main god was called Shak, and they were a god of agriculture and a god of rain. Now, Egypt varies. You've got mostly sun gods like Osiris, who's the father of Horus. So as you said, Horus is a falcon. You do have some. You've got Nephthys, who's the goddess of death. You've got Osiris. You've got Anubis, who is the god of the underworld. But they weren't obsessed with death. It was more about sort of like, in the same way that Christians have heaven and hell. I wouldn't say that you're obsessed with death or that you're a death cult by, having a concept of the afterlife, essentially. The final bit is the David Gergen bit, where he essentially, ambushes the guy. And yeah, it does look kind of impressive. He sort of embarrasses the bloke, but it's a private club. It's kind of like if someone ran up to you and basically said, oh, in Phi Phi Kappa, when you did the thing where you had to put your dick on the biscuit, like, and you'd be like, I don't want to talk about this now, thanks. Like, do you know what I mean? It's a secret club. It's just, it's a getaway for something. Like, it's, aside from anything else, he doesn't actually say anything. Weaving spiders come not here, okay? He sort of gets that across as if it's some sort of really, really horrific sort of code about basically like, we'll kill you in our web of secrecy, Illuminati, Jewish web, all of these webs, right? Weaving spiders come not here. It's from Midsummer Night's Dream. And in the context of the Bohemian Grove, it's actually a reminder for the people in there to not talk about the outside world, to not talk about business. You're there to have a good time and to relax and to get rid of all your cares. Oh, bit of foreshadowing. That might be why they cremate this thing called care. Now, obviously, this doesn't happen, and that is a real problem, that they do talk about policy stuff in there, but we'll come on to that in a bit. He then basically goes on to say that Nancy, how widespread is the occult? He says that Nancy Reagan uses astrology, which is true. He then goes on to say that Eleanor Roosevelt does seances. Now, there's never been really any evidence at all that that's true. It's just one of these tropes that comes about. And that Tony Blair praying to the light. Now, yes, that did appear in national newspapers, but it was a retelling of a story from, again, a gossip column. There's one source to this story. It doesn't quote anybody. The implication is that the whole thing is completely made up. There's certainly not a lot to back it up. And I would love that. I'd love it if Tony Blair was praying to an entity called the Light and doing stuff like that. Do I think Tony Blair's a good guy? Hell no.
Hell no. I second that.
But I don't think that he's got anything to do with occult rituals in this regard. I think it was a made-up story. Hitler was obsessed with the occult to a degree. Now, this is where he starts to lie. He was a member of secret societies Fall and Thule. He wasn't a member of the Fool Society. He was potentially a member of the Thule Society. And he says that these two link to Skull and Bones, which is the Yale Society, through the Germanic Order, the secret society, the Order of Death. Now, there is one problem with this, and he's named his film The Order of Death after the Order of Death, the Germanic Secret Society. Do you know what the problem might be with the Order of Death?
No.
They're fictional. There's no evidence that any such entity ever existed, ever.
I thought that was just Skull and Bones.
No, well, Skull and Bones was a thing, but that started in Yale in 1932. This
I
idea
thought it was a code name. Like, I'm just going back to my old truther thoughts or whatever when, seeing the Order of Death, a documentary, and Skull and Bones being in it. That's just what I kind of connected the two, but it's actually not even real.
No, well, he says, that's kind of the case, because he says that Skull and Bones is a reimagining of the ancient Teutonic Order of Death. But seeing as the ancient Teutonic Order of Death isn't a real thing, then we could fairly assume that line of inquiry is probably wrong. He says Aleister Crowley was friends with the royals. No, he was not. No, he absolutely was not. That's just rubbish. That's completely made up. Church of Satan, Temple of Set, OTO, Golden Dawn, Skull and Bones, Freemasonry, all denominations of the same religion, the Egyptian Babylonian mystery schools. Nonsense. That's just nonsense. That's just absolute nonsense. They're all completely different, like, organizations. Some of those hate each other. Like, some of them don't get on with each other. Like, but again, what he's doing is saying bad things that aren't Christian, they're all bad.
That's the one thing they all have in common, not Christian.
Exactly.
He then goes on to say that Albert Pike was the supreme grandmaster of the entire world of Freemasonry and also founded the Ku Klux Klan. Neither of those things are true. They're just completely made up. So, again, not to take anything away from Alex Jones, because he's clearly, again, he has broken into this enclave, but he's just made up a load of crap to frame it in a completely different way. Going on to Joe Rogan. He says it was set up by Mark Twain. It was a liberal deal for hookers and gay guys. If you go back to the 1870s when Mark Twain set it up, it was a classically liberal, and it was for partying and gay dudes and saloons and female hookers. It wasn't set up by Mark Twain. In 1870, Mark Twain was not massively famous. He'd not even put out his first book. He'd certainly not put out the books that made him a megastar. He was considered a bit of a witty character, but he also lived in Buffalo, New York. So why on earth would he be founding a secret society in a redwood forest on the completely other side of the country? Aside from that, he wasn't. He was made an honorary member later, but I don't know why Alex Jones would continually try and say that Mark Twain founded it. Now, I have an idea. It's not a very pleasant idea. Mark Twain was essentially quite a fan of civil rights and socialisation, by which I mean sort of, looking after the poorest people of society. That's the only thing I could think, that for some reason Alex Jones thinks that those two things are bad and that Bohemian Grove is bad, and so Mark Twain must be bad and we'll connect them together. That's the only thing that I could possibly think, and that doesn't really bear thinking about, does it? But that may well be the case.
Well, they kind of do that quite a lot, really. That seems to be the reason Alex Jones doesn't like a lot of people. They seem to have that thing in common.
It does really. It's a shame, isn't it? He then basically says that he was hit on by loads of famous people. It's like, oh, piss off, Alex. If you'd have been hit on by famous people, we'd have heard about this in the last 20 years.
We would have heard about it on that tape.
Yes, and also the stuff about the audience saying, shut up, I'll kill you. Like, you've waited 20 years to tell us this? Oh, I don't buy it. And there's this idea that there's a picture of Henry Kissinger with his fingers up his arse. Again, we would have heard of that over the last 20 years. Like, it's just absolutely not true. What else did he say on the Joe Rogan show? Oh, the effigy is designed to look like a kid. No, it isn't. No. He shows the effigy in order of death. It looks like an adult skeleton. It just looks like
it looks a bit bigger than an adult.
Yeah, if anything, yeah. It's a giant.
Like 7 foot, a 7 foot tall kind of effigy.
Baby, apparently, yeah.
So people can see it from across the lake.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. He then says that basically, like, in 1900, Skull and Bones, which is a death cult, took over, and that's when they set up as a central deal. This isn't true. He says that Skull and Bones forces gay sex. It doesn't force gay sex. It forces the members to masturbate in a coffin whilst recanting their entire sexual history. It's an initiation. Now, is it weird? Yeah, it's desperately weird. But it's not forcing gay sex on people. Then on Adam Schultz, you'll remember that he says that basically that he was paid to sneak in. He was paid to sneak in by Channel 4, and John Ronson got in through the security guards, and he had to sign an NDA. And that's just not true. And we know this is not true because there's two sources. Again, The Secret Rulers of the Universe, which was the behind-the-scenes footage, and the book They. David Icke told John Ronson about Bohemian Grove. John Ronson was going to break into Bohemian Grove. He told Alex Jones, and Alex Jones invited himself along. Also, basically, this is what he said. Before the call was out, Alex had invited himself along. To be honest, I was glad that Alex was coming along. He seemed a fearless kind of guy that would not get into trouble. He was not a fearless guy, and his plans were not very good. Before they went up, the group split into two because Alex and Mike suddenly got the idea that John and Rick were probably FBI agents and were plotting to hand them in. So they, rather than walking down the path, jumped into the forest and ran through the forest, getting horribly stung with poison oak before basically getting in. As I said, John and Rick just walked in. So it's just lies. It's absolute lies.
Now he says John Ronson was MI6.
Yeah, oh, does he? Well,
yes.
Now, what he fell out with John Ronson was because basically John Ronson exposed Alex Jones's backstory as being fake. Alex Jones said that he had to leave town because his dad was into CIA stuff, and he exposed a drug dealing ring with the local chief of police dealing drugs. He outed them at a public assembly and then was beaten up by the police, and his dad had to move them out of town. What actually happened was Alex Jones, and let's remember how gorgeous Alex Jones was at that time, which in some way mitigates this. Like, he king hit a bloke, he walks up behind him and smacked this bloke in the back of the head, knocking his head against the locker and knocking him out. Why? Because this bloke had pulled a girl that Alex Jones fancied. Alex Jones was known as being a bully, so they arranged a party, invited Alex Jones to it, and kicked 7 shades of shit out of him, so badly that he was hospitalised, and basically it was made clear that he wasn't welcome anywhere in the town, and that's why he moved away. Not because he exposed a drug cartel or that he was being asked back to Illuminati sex parties because he was so damn gorgeous, although that I can believe, but it's just not true. So this is why Alex Jones fell out with John Ronson. But this is the sad shame about Alex Jones, is that basically he's done something brilliant. He has actually broken into something, but he's lied about how brave he was. He's lied about whose idea it was, and he's framed what's actually happened in the most ridiculous way so as to fit an agenda. Now, we'll come on to it in more detail later, but when John Ronson was looking back at the cremation of Care, what he said to Alex was, that looks silly to me. I can see what this is. Basically, what happens is care, the idea of care in the world, the business world, is represented as an effigy. And they do a play with a Greek chorus in which they say, we want to burn care. We're the most important people in the world. We've got all these stresses on our shoulders. We want to burn care so that we can enjoy our party for the next 2 weeks. And they have a chat with the spirit of the woods, Midsummer. And basically, Midsummer says, you says, you can't burn me. There's no way you can burn me. I'm always going to be there. At which point they start talking to the owl. The owl represents Athena and the goddess of wisdom. And they say to the owl, how can we destroy care? Owl says, with the fire of fellowship. So essentially what they're saying is, through friendship and maybe a bit of gay stuff in the woods, perhaps. So they use a different torch, the fellowship fire, and then they set fire to the effigy, and then that's where you hear that blood-curdling scream. The blood-curdling scream and the voice of Care was done by Walter Cronkite, the news anchor, who was also a member of Bohemian Grove. He recorded it. It's a play that's done out each year. John Ronson said that he thought it was incredibly, he found the whole experience to be really, really immature. And he said there was a lot of willy-waving humour and pissing on trees and stuff like that. And he said it reminded him of like a frat house. And he says that although these are the most powerful people in the world, he says that on an emotional level, it's clear that they're sort of stuck somewhere back in their sort of college days. And we didn't mention before that women aren't allowed there. This is why the prostitutes are outside. And there is a degree of like, girls suck, boys rule, that sort of stuff. And again, there is a degree of homosexual activity that goes on there. But John Ronson said that he saw it completely differently to how Alex saw it, that he didn't see anything that was satanic. He saw stuff that was very, very silly and juvenile and a lot of bad poetry. And he also chastises Alex. He said, by trying to frame this as satanic because you don't understand it, you're missing the point. You're doing the same thing to the Grovers that the mainstream media did to the Branch Davidians and Randy Weaver. Yes, they're weird. Yes, they've got this going on. Yes, we don't understand it. Hence, they must be a cult within the Branch Davidians. Yes, this guy knows Nazis. Yes, he's got weapons. Yes, he's suspicious of the government. Hence, Randy Weaver must be part of a white supremacist cult. And John Ronson said that in the same way, the mainstream media had smeared those two people who Alex Jones knew, and he knew that to be not true. He said that Alex was doing exactly the same thing with his framing of the Bohemian Grove Yeah.
He's not wrong there. That is completely right.
It is. This is the thing that struck me about it. It's like, it's a shame because, like, rewatching it, I found it far less impressive than the first time I watched it, and thought it's a shame because there is something strange going on here. And there is actually, for want of a better word, a conspiracy that some other people have been following for years that he's completely missed, and in fact he's shrouding by insisting on playing the satanic panic angle. In many ways, it sort of benefits the Grove, because when you're focusing on the crazy aspects of it, you're not thinking about the other things that could be going on when you've got huge numbers of powerful people unchecked in a place that is beyond the scrutiny of the public. Okay, so moving swiftly on. The conspiracy of silence. This is a strange one, right? Okay. Now, remember, Paul Benassi said that he was made to film a snuff film, potentially filmed by Hunter S. Thompson in Bohemian Grove. Now, Hunter S. Thompson was known to be a strange person, and his secretary has been asked about this, and he says, well, you know, once he did actually try and show me a snuff film, and I refused to watch it. And it's entirely plausible. She says that Hunter might have been involved in something like that, but if he was involved as an investigative journalist. She says she never saw this and she never knew of it, but she knew that he was into darker things, but only as an investigative journalist, she said. Now, the thing about Paul Benassi is, I actually think that there's something very, very real in the Franklin savings scandal. I think elements of it potentially are exaggerated, but I think that definitely the children were used in a prostitution ring in regards to that in Omaha, Nebraska. I think there were drugs involved. I don't know as to whether they were, and I think there were celebrities involved. I don't know as to whether there was any satanic rituals or snuff films. And here's the thing about Paul Benassi's story, right? Okay, it really boils down to whether you believe Paul Benassi or not. Paul Benassi is a convicted child molester. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's lying, but it would mean that potentially he has a reason to try and paint himself as a hero in a broader sense. I'm not saying that he's lying, and I think that some of the things that he's saying are definitely true. But the problem with the story about the snuff film at Bohemian Grove is it boils down to him, to whether you believe him or not. Now, the fact that basically he said that he saw a stone owl there, whilst that was not common knowledge, as we're about to discover, it was on the television in 1981. Like, a picture of the cremation of Care was shown on the television in 1981. So it's entirely plausible that Paul had seen that and or read numerous articles that had come out before he actually made those statements. I believe the Franklin case, I believe there was child sex going on. I believe they were taking kids out of care homes. I believe there were drugs involved. I believe that there were the parties where influential people were there, either using the kids for pleasure or as part of a blackmail plot. And I also believe that the trial was completely dodgy and that Alicia Owens was given a huge sentence in order to scare people off. But as regards to the Bohemian Grove aspect of it, we really just can't say. You know, we're here to question everything. Could Paul Benassi be lying? Yeah, he could be. Yeah, he could. It is an incredibly sensational story, and it is an incredibly violent and horrific story. It might be true, but we just can't prove it. So, coming on to David Icke. David Icke basically says... Hey, good old David.
Davey boy.
He says that sacrifices go on all throughout the week there and that reptilians change back into lizards. Well, he's clearly not heard the first part of the Someday I Call It Conspiracy podcast, has he? We did that like 2 episodes ago. If only he'd heard that episode before he made such wild claims. Never mind. Now, the owl in the street map. He's got that. That's true. There is an owl in the street map. And I can well believe that it is a representation of Athena or wisdom or something like that. I don't know if people are aware, but basically there were occultists that designed the street map. Lon Font was an occultist. And I don't mean that in a sort of like, no, Satan occultist sort of way. People that were interested in esoteria. They
were Freemasons, weren't they?
Yeah, Freemasons and sacred geometry and maybe even a degree of Illuminism and that sort of stuff because they believed themselves to be those people. So he's absolutely spot on with that. There is an owl in the street of Washington, D.C. So salute to David Icke for finding that because that's absolutely true. Now, what he shows us the depiction of the deity in Mesopotamia just isn't that. And it takes literally 4 seconds to look up the Burney relief and find out that it's not a depiction of a goddess. Nobody knows quite what it is. The most common explanation for what it is a sign for a brothel.
What?
Yes, it might be a sign for a brothel. And so she's sort of like a sort of almost like a fertility god, or a sort of, get it here type sign, essentially. The idea that this is proof of owl worship. So I looked it up and I found this quote. There are thousands of Mesopotamian deities. The Burney relief is the only living example of Mesopotamian art ever found or ever known to exist that contains an owl. No other examples of owls in iconographic context exist in Mesopotamian art, nor are there textual references that directly associate owls with a particular god or goddess. So David Icke's contention and Tex Ma's contention that this Babylonian or Phoenician deity or any of these ancient societies worshipped an owl, I'm afraid it's just bullshit. It's just nonsense. It's just made up.
Yeah.
And it's another one of these things where basically they hope that nobody actually bothers to go and check to see what's gone on there.
Because when you do, you find out that they're not telling you
There's
the
actually
truth.
a reasonable explanation for all of these things. Right, so let's just do a little quick timeline of Bohemian Grove. It started in 1872, or the Bohemian Club formed in 1872, and this is a building in San Francisco. It's a gentleman's club that liked to attract people who were connected to the arts. Basically, you had to be good at speaking, good at music, good at acting, or a fun time to be with, like, a good after-dinner speaker or a comedian or something like that. And then they'd let you join. But it started in Marion County. The first cremation of care actually happened in 1881, and it wasn't until 1893 that they moved to Sonoma at the current location. And they didn't actually buy the land until 1899. Now, the first mention of this now you've got to remember this is a completely secret society that nobody's ever been in before Alex Jones, that nobody knows anything about. Well, in 1903, so this is basically shortly after they've moved to the site where it's at, there's an article in the San Francisco Call that describes the Bohemian Grove as a getaway for businessmen where they can enjoy midsummer jinks away from the strenuous business world. So this secret society has made itself aware as early as 1903.
1903.
Yeah. Now they had actually started collecting their annals and the plays that are published at the Bohemian Grove in the library at the Bohemian Club as early as 1900. And these are available online now. And they were evidently available in the 70s because a chap called William Donhoff managed to get them, specifically because a gentleman that he knew broke inside and watched the cremation of care, and he wanted to compare his description of it to the recorded description of it in the annals of Bohemian Grove. In 1943, the Manhattan Project was actually discussed at Bohemian Grove. Remember we said that the nuclear sort of bomb was discussed there. This is true, but it wasn't discussed at the summer getaway, was it, Brent? The Manhattan Project, that's a bit of a misnomer. That's sort of a lie by omission that's put around by the alternative media. It implies that it went off at the piss-up in July. It didn't.
It went off in September.
Exactly. Now,
it
why
was an actual summer camp, like team building exercise to talk about this stuff, away from the offices.
And this is the point. Like, basically, the Bohemian Grove is a massive empty thing. There's not just stuff. That's the main thing. But throughout the year, they kind of rent it out to people. Sometimes they even let girls in. But basically, yeah, the Manhattan Project was discussed there in 1943, but it wasn't discussed there during the actual knees up in July.
Now, those are the actual, normal members.
Yeah.
The actual kind of actors and performers of the ceremony and of other hijinks. These are the ones that are allowed to go any time of the year. And they're allowed to bring their families.
Like with the Manhattan Project, they basically just say, look, we need a place. It's almost like renting a meeting room. Like, we need a place where we can go and discuss something quite a lofty topic, and we could do without being interrupted every 5 minutes. So basically, that's what happened with the Manhattan Project. They used it as a sort of working space, essentially. But it is true.
For English audience, it's like Centre Parks.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. It's like going to Centre Parks and using the meeting room there, basically. In 1946, Charles K. Field publishes a transcript of the cremation of care ceremony.
What year?
1946.
Okay.
And this was, again, this was published by the Bohemian Club themselves. How widely it was available is not entirely clear, but it was available certainly in 1975 to William Donhoff. In 1967, the Town Talk newspaper reports that at the Bohemian Grove, Reagan spoke to Nixon and he decided to step aside and allow Nixon to run to be the president. So again, this is an example of a newspaper talking about this secret society. In 1971, Nixon is caught on tape describing the Bohemian Club and the Bohemian Grove as the most faggy goddamn thing that you could ever imagine. And this is absolutely true. He was caught on tape. He'd been to the Bohemian Club a few times and he sort of fell out with them because he was a fairly conservative chap, Nixon. That won't be a shock to people who know about him, but he was. And he didn't like the homosexual activity that was going on there. But I don't think he was actually talking about homosexual activity as much as he's talking about plays and acting and, actor stuff. Like, what's the expression, that bunch of Nancy actors? I think he's speaking to that rather than the fact, because, he was a very, very conservative person. But that is definitely a real quote that has been caught on tape. In 1970, throughout the 70s, in the San Francisco Chronicle, in the gossip column, Herb Caen wrote regular articles each year about Bohemian Grove and his concern that massive amounts of prostitutes were being shipped into Monte Rio to cater to the elite gentlemen that were there. So again, throughout the 70s, every year in the San Francisco Chronicle, Herb Caen spoke about Bohemian Grove and the fact that elites were meeting there and that prostitutes were being sent to Monte Rio. And he felt that this was a bad thing on two counts. One, because he felt that it's bad that the elites are meeting out to the sight of public. What could they possibly be getting up to? And two, he just felt that it was sleazy that prostitutes were there, basically. In 1975, there is a book published by William Domhoff. Now, this book is called The Bohemian Grove and Other Retreats. The first thing that he does is he describes the cremation of care. A gentleman called John Van der Zee actually broke inside and stayed there for, I think it was 2 weekends. And William Donhoff sort of collated information they'd already found from the annals and from the club's library and from John Van der Zee and found out what was going off. And he says that the most thing that happens there is plays. Just to go again, he talks about the cremation of care. There is no satanic element in the cremation of care. They're not worshipping the owl. They ask the owl's advice in a sort of mock representation of like ancient Greece. They ask how can they best throw off the cares of the world and enjoy summer. And the hero of the piece is three things: wisdom, fellowship, friendship, and midsummer. And that's why they say, once again, midsummer sets us free. Care, shall we burn thee again tonight? And that's what they're saying. They're saying, can we get rid of our cares for just 2 weeks? And Care says, no, you can't. I'm too enormous. And they say, well, we've asked this owl, and this owl says that this fire will do it. And lo and behold, the owl is right. And that's what the cremation of care is. And so the death that brings in the effigy is supposed to be Chiron from the River Styx, which is, a representation of the boatmaster from the Clash of the Titans, if you like, which was also copied by those ancient Greek myths, I believe. But that's what it is. It's just a sort of Shakespearean thing. Now, they have two types of plays there that go on. They have hijinks and lowjinks. Hijinks are very cultured. Their attempts at sort of doing either sort of cod Shakespearean or sort of very impressive high art. And these usually have a cast of about 350 people each play, and there's dozens of them throughout the week, and they cost sometimes more than £35,000 each. There are low jinks, which are basically comedies, but these comedies are not very sophisticated, apparently. They make on the buses look like fucking Spinal Tap.
I was just going to say, right-winged can't do comedy.
No. And they cost a little less. They're about $20,000. But this was in the 70s, remember, and they have a cast of about 200 to 250 people. William John Hoff talks about what Herb Cain has been saying, which is about jumping the river, which means going to Monterio for prostitutes. But he says that basically there's like it's hiking, shooting, boating, fishing, going to see prostitutes, and getting woken up in the morning with gin fizzers. So basically there's a huge amount of drinking. Like it's all about drinking. People turn up pissed and drink throughout the day. Membership is quite difficult. You need like 3 sponsors and 5 people who know you. And apparently there's a waiting list of about 10 years. And this was in 1975. I've heard it's as long as 30 years now. But he also says there's copycat clubs, one in Santa Barbara that's called the Rancheros, and one in Colorado that's called the Roundup Riders. And these are basically seen as not quite as sophisticated Bohemian Groves, where basically people get together, they drink, there's a theme going on, and they basically sort of talk. Now, William Donhoff talks about what the real problem is with Bohemian Grove, and it's this concept that he talks about of social cohesion. Now, remember he said that this concept of weaving spiders come not here is that they're not supposed to talk about business whilst they're in there. Well, of course they bloody do, don't they? In fact, loads and loads of different types of sort of like policy has actually been dictated whilst inside that. And the problem is with that is that if you get people, the concept of social cohesion says that basically if you get people to be friends in a social group, they're more likely to support one another and be loyal in other areas. So if I'm a member of your country club and we've got pissed and had a slash up against a tree together, I might be more inclined to vote in your favour when this policy comes by. And so Donhoff talks about it in the same way that people are concerned about other think tanks and stuff like that. Very, very powerful people are potentially dictating policy or dictating the way that policy goes. And that is actually true, that this is going on. Now, there is a group that is very, very concerned with that was run by a lady called Mary Moore. This is the Bohemian Grove Action Group. Now, the Bohemian Grove Action Group speaks specifically to that. They're the people that say that that's where Star Wars was initially discussed. They mentioned the Manhattan Group. Mary Moore has been opposed to the Bohemian Club since the 70s. And in the 80s, she founded the Bohemian Grove Action Network. The Bohemian Grove Action Network has been there for years. It's been there basically protesting the Bohemian Grove every single year since 1980, publishing newsletters. It's been in newspapers in 1984 and 1986 and 1982. So again, this idea that the Bohemian Grove was secret or that nobody was looking at it is just completely nonsense. Now, in They and Secret Rulers of the World, which we'll come on to again in a bit more detail just in a moment, but John Ronson meets Mary Moore and he asks her, he says, what about the cremation of care? And she says, oh, it's just silly. He says, are they sacrificing children in there? And her exact quote was, oh, no, that's just daft. That's just something that right-wingers say. Now, this is in the year 2000, so she knows her shit because she's been protesting the group for 20 years. And she points out further that all that satanic panic crap diverts people away from the potential real problems, which is that there are powerful people there without scrutiny. In 1981, Parade magazine came out, which is that partial quote that Alex Jones used. If he'd have used the other one, it wouldn't have been quite as impressive. Also in 1981, Mother Jones did an article. In the summer of 1980, Rick Cloger snuck into Bohemian Grove posing as a waiter and stayed for 2 weeks. So all this talk of Alex being the first person to break in, it just simply isn't true. Now, he basically, again, said the same thing. He says that he saw quite a lot of famous people. He's the person that said that weaving spiders come up here refers to the secrecy required by guests, but also refers to the idea that guests should not discuss business or lobbying matters at the Grove, but this obviously does happen. In the late 30s, Ernest O. Lawrence, America's premier nuclear physicist, forged the ties that ensured him funding to develop his massive cyclotron, connections that sped him and the country on the way to the development of the atomic bomb. And he actually, Rick Cloger, got hold of some of the talks, the lakeside talks that Alex says about world government. I couldn't find anything about world government, but these are the ones that he listed. The history of magic, America's Cup, and how America will do this year yachting, the Persian Gulf crisis, and that was George Lenkaszewski of the American Economic Institution. So these are starting to go into sort of lofty things. US naval supremacy, and this is by Admiral Thomas Haywood. The World Petrol Situation by Fred Hartley of Union Oil, and The Red Menace and the Oil Supply by Edward Teller, who was the father of the H-bomb. So that's where the real conspiracy is, that actually, despite all proclamations that this isn't going on, very important policy and directions of countries potentially being discussed there. He also was pointed out that prostitutes were there. So despite apparently the police cracking down off the back of the William Donhoff revelation in 1975, in 1981 there's still plenty of prostitutes there. So don't panic. You can still get prostitutes. He says the actual the actual patron saint of the club is the statue of St. John of Nepomuc. He was ordered drowned by a jealous king in the 14th century for refusing to reveal the Queen's confession, and he stands with his fingers to his lips, a model of loyal discretion for the Bohemians. So again, it's about basically what happens in Bohemian Grove stays in Bohemian Grove. Yeah.
It kind of squashes the satanic element to the conspiracy theory. They have a patron saint.
Yeah.
And like you said, like why he was killed was because he wouldn't tell someone else's confession. That's actually very Christian.
Yes.
So that just blows the satanic stuff straight out of the water.
I'm afraid it does. I mean, he does list, this article lists people that they saw there. Gerald Ford, William Buckley, Herbert Hoover, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Fred Hartley of Union Oil, Admiral Thomas Haywood, Merv Griffin, the entertainer, Joseph Coors of the CNP, Edward Teller, Henry Kissinger, Neil Armstrong, A.W. Clausen, who was the head of the World Bank, George Bush, the Attorney General William Smith, Nelson Rockefeller, Dwight Eisenhower, George Shultz, and William Randolph Hearst Jr. So again, there's no doubt that very, very influential people go there. But this was in published articles in Mother Jones in 1981. In 1987, Governor Brown of California said in several mainstream newspapers, Bohemian Grove, you go up there, you talk, you drink, you tell dirty stories. So that's yet another time that this secret society has had someone explain what goes on inside it before Alex Jones was the first person to ever break in there. In 1989, Spy magazine comes out, and this is the one that basically Alex Jones was very, very annoyed with. And I don't know why. It says that there's a bunch of payphones in there. It says that Henry Kissinger was enjoying the jazz concert, but apparently he's considered rude because he jumps the queue for the phones. Now, despite rumours of heavy security, Weiss actually approached Mary Moore to try and get him in. And she basically said, you just walk in. Just walk in, nobody checks. She had a friend called Rick who goes in quite regularly. He just basically looks the part and so he walks in, and it transpires that Rick is the Rick that was with John Ronson and Alex Jones and Mike Hansen when he went in. So Rick had been in many, many times before. Rick was the person that John Ronson got the map off because he'd got that from a time previously when he'd been inside. Because Rick has this map, basically Alex Jones starts to think that he might be being set up. There's an atmosphere of paranoia that pervades Alex Jones throughout the entire thing. He doesn't come across in the behind-the-scenes footage as nearly as brave as he does in his own film, I'm afraid. Basically, he just says that there's loads and loads of heavy drinking. He says that the Grovers are woken up at 7 with a gin cocktail. People urinate everywhere, and they make a show of it. He says that skinny dipping and homoeroticism is quite common, and single men get openly propositioned by older Grove members. So that's true. There's an element of that. You know what I thought about this as well? Like, I don't buy Alex Jones's concept that it's all blackmailing people or coercing people or whatever. I think it's an atmosphere of like boarding schools, isn't it? Hey, some people, this is going to blow some people's mind, right? But some people are gay. Some people happen to be gay, and they also happen to be very, very powerful. And so if they're gay and they're pissed and they're away a fun time, they might want to have sex with somebody. There's also the possibility that, they get pissed and they start leering at like some of the younger members and stuff like that. That happens everywhere. That happens in every nightclub and every pub and probably every workplace in the land at some point, basically. Oh, sorry. What was the thing that we missed off earlier? I need to go back to this. When Alex Jones talks about Walter Schmidt and saying that basically, because Walter Schmidt had been there, he says, our Illuminati rituals are brilliant, but these ones in the Grove, they're so much better. Can you believe that wasn't a real quote? At no point does Walter Schmidt basically mention the Illuminati. What he says, his actual quote is, the Grove is magnificent, the redwoods are captivating. And so he talks about how incredibly impressive the trees are in comparison to the trees that he's got back in Germany. He doesn't talk about the Illuminati rituals. So again, I'm afraid Alex Jones has lied there. I don't know why, but he does. Now, it was Weiss in 1989 that basically he again talks about the cremation of Care, and he's the person that revealed that Walter Cronkite does the voice for Care. This is the bit that got Alex really annoyed, because basically Weiss had looked into it, and he said that the cremation of Care derives from copying Druid rites, medieval Christian liturgy, and the Book of Common Prayer, Shakespearean drama, and 19th century American lodge rules, which refers to sort of Freemasonic rituals.
Yeah.
But you'll notice that it's Shakespearean, Christian liturgy, the Book of Common Prayer. Why is Alex Jones pissed off with that? Because it goes against his framing of this as a satanic thing. It's arty-farty, bad poetry. It's bad. It's bad theatre. It's not very bright people thinking that they're doing something that's quite clever. It's like Coldplay. But it's not satanic, right? Okay. And again, I'm going to reiterate, there are huge problems. I agree with Mary Moore and William Donhoff that there is an element of danger that this bypasses democracy. But to suggest that it's satanic does several things. One, it distracts from the real problem. Two, it makes them seem much more cooler and more powerful than they actually are. And three, most people will dismiss it out of hand because it sounds stupid. Apparently tipping the staff at Bohemian Grove is forbidden, but so is shouting at them or treating them badly in any way. Now, Nixon, the reason that Nixon fell out with Bohemian Grove is explained in this article. He says that basically he wanted to do a lakeside speech, and they says, no, that's all right, we've got someone better than you. And so he threw a hissy fit. And apparently Nixon said, anyone can become president of the United States of America, but few have any hope of becoming president of the Bohemian Grove. And apparently, one of the things that they offer is a walking stick with an owl on top of it. And if you're lucky enough, you can go and whip one of these away as a souvenir. But unfortunately, by the time Weiss got there, it had already gone. Where did the idea that Moloch is an owl come from? Where do you think Alex Jones got it from? Now, he implies very heavily that he's figured it out himself from looking at Leviticus, which you'll remember is in the Bible. But I think what he's actually done is he's got it from a chap called Mark Walter Evans, because in 1993, Mark Walter Evans put out an article called Bigwigs Perpetuate Canaanite Cults. And in this, he basically talks about Bohemian Grove. So again, somebody else is talking about Bohemian Grove. So I think we're up to about 12 exposés of Bohemian Grove before Alex Jones got in there. But he says, the most jarring of all of this is the contradiction between the pious, hand-over-heart singing of the Star-Spangled Banner that occurs at party conventions and the secret ritual that is the real turn-on for the ruling class, the habituates of the Grove. For when the rich and powerful gather at the river, it is not to pray and sing psalms and hymns. However, let it not be said that these men have no religion. Every July, the summer encampment at Bohemian Grove is opened with a remarkable commencement ceremony. And then he goes on to mention basically the William Donhoff book, which describes the owl. And he quotes from the ceremony, "O thou great symbol of all mortal wisdom, owl of Bohemia, we do beseech thee, grant us thy counsel." And so this is it. Just to explain what a Bohemian is. A Bohemian is a very poor person who's artistic. So it's this romanticized concept of the striving poor artist. Now, it's ironic that none of the people in the Bohemian Club are poor. It costs thousands of dollars each year to be a member. But again, it's this romanticization, isn't it? They're playing. And
the people that
if-
started it were romanticizing that
Yeah.
idea, like giving up your entire life just to create art.
But you have to participate. You know, if you want to be a good bohemian, you have to be part of the plays. You don't have to necessarily act, but you have to be behind the scenes or whatever. They tend to get sort of, you know, better actors and stuff to do the thing. One thing that's interesting is that all of these people try and claim that in that actual cremation of care, the people in the robes are George Bush or Clinton or whatever.
That's
No.
precisely what they're saying.
That's exactly what they're saying. They're implying that basically this is a satanic ritual and the world leaders are in the satanic ritual. Neither of those things are true. There's certain members of the club who are afforded the opportunity to be the leader of the high priest or whatever in it. But it's based on your position within the club. It's not anything to do with your rank outside in the world. And there's never, as far as I could find, any indication or evidence that anyone of any significance was ever in the cremation of care. So when they imply that, it's just, again, it's lying by omission and trying to convince you of something that really isn't true. Basically, what he says, that the cremation of care bears too strong a resemblance to the ancient Canaanite worship of the idol Molech. The Owl of Bohemia, like the ancient Ammonite idol Molech, is a towering, larger-than-life edifice. The bronze Molech was hollow inside, whereas the owl is solid, and the altar stands before it. But Molech worship consisted of the ritualized sacrifice of the firstborn infant son of every Ammonite newlywed family. Building a fire in the belly of the beast, getting it good and stoked so that the flames poured out of the mouth, the high priest mounted a scaffold and tossed the firstborn male child into the aperture in Molech's chest, to the incantation of drums and droned liturgy of the priests of Molech. Does the boho sugarcoating of the ritual of the cremation of care, for what seems to the purposes of public relations, obscure a darker psychological aspect of the rite? Are we faced with the continuity of a tradition of sacrificial rite, even on a symbolic level? This is significant and in of itself. Moreover, persistent rumours and reports from various sources tell of bizarre rituals, child snuff films and other horrors taking place within the confines of the grove. Now, he's speaking there of Paul Benassi and the potential snuff film in there. But let's just get this absolutely clear, because I don't want people to think I'm being unfair here. He says that the cremation of care must be a human sacrifice because it's so similar to the Canaanite deity, and it's similar in two ways. One, it's a big animal, and two, there's a fire. It's been staring us in the face all this time. I'm serious, that is exactly what he says. He says, oh, it's far too similar to not be it. It's a big animal and there's a fire involved. I believe that's where the concept of Molech came from. That's the earliest reference I can find to the owl representing Molech, which it just blatantly doesn't. And that's a real problem, because once you realise that it's nothing to do with Molech, then it becomes rather silly, to be quite honest. Going on to John Ronson, them Adventures with Extremists, and the film Secret Rulers of the World. He says he got it from Ike. That's where he first heard about the Bohemian Grove. And Ike said, don't go there because the reptilians will kill you. Not exactly that, but in so many words, he advises him not to go there because it's dangerous, because reptiles do satanic rituals in the woods there. And apparently Ike got that from Cathy O'Brien. He said if you'd read Cathy O'Brien's book, you would never go anywhere near Bohemian Grove. But then, basically, Alex Jones invited himself. John didn't ask him. He phoned him up and said, do you know anything about Bohemian Grove? And Alex said, oh, that place is sick. You've got presidents and prime ministers running around naked. They have orgies and worship a devil owl. And then proceeded to invite himself on the trip. So the idea that Alex Jones was sort of coerced into this as a trick is just bullshit. So they get the map from Mary Moore. Mary Moore is the lady that started the Bohemian Grove Action Network in 1980, and she's been protesting it since then. And she says, basically, no, it's just right-wingers that are concerned with satanic practice. It's all very, very silly. Like, that detracts from what's really going on there. Her concern is networking without oversight or scrutiny. Now, basically, when they get back and they produce this map, Mike Hansen and Alex immediately think that they're being set up, and so get really panicky. And at one point they get into a bit of a row because they accuse John Ronson of being FBI. He also thinks that the maid's spying on him because the maid keeps going past the rooms.
Imagine that.
Exactly. But again, they also describe that basically they have a tie camera and a pager camera, so that incident by the lakeside was a complete fabrication. Now, Rick, who's been there many times and seen the cremation of care many times, describes the cremation of care as silly but elaborate, harmless fun, and he's seen it numerous times. But Alex gets cross with him and says, this isn't harmless, pranky type fun. You have super powerful men in druid outfits burning an effigy in front of an owl. And it just so happens that primitive cultures have the same owl and throw children inside the burning innards of the owl. That's historically based. And it's not. He's got it completely wrong. He's got it completely confused. So anyway, what they do is they go out and they buy preppy clothes and they buy like Ralph Lauren stuff, which is interesting because that's exactly how Alex Jones dresses nowadays. Now he's got some money. But Ron asks Alex, so what happens if we get caught? What happens if security spot that we're not Bohemian Grove members? Alex's plan is, I'll go crazy and act violent if caught. I'll act as if I've got a bomb or a weapon, and I'll just say, back off, man, back off. To which John Ronson points out that might not be the best idea in a place where there's Secret Service floating around. But yeah, Alex Jones's plan is to pretend he has a bomb on him if he's cornered.
Wow.
Right.
What
so
could
anyway,
possibly go wrong?
Exactly. So Rick basically just
we
says,
know from Richard McCaslin's story.
Well, exactly.
What could possibly go wrong?
So that's very true, Ben. So basically, they just walk in. Rick and John just walk in. As I say, they have a chat with the security guard as they go in there, just talking about how pleasant the day is and stuff like that. Whereas Alex and Mike seem scared stiff and they run inside. And then they spot them about 5 minutes after walking in. And John and Rick are just wandering around drinking drinks and eating the food and having a bit of a nice time, chatting with people just willy-nilly. And Alex apparently walks up to him and says, don't go in the woods, it's full of owls, and then just walks off. And Rick apparently looks at him and goes, Jesus God, those guys are really, really paranoid, aren't they? And basically, Alex goes off and hides until the cremation of care and then goes back. And then they show the cremation of care in the hotel room. And Mike and Alex and Violet, who is Alex's partner at the time, are almost geeing each other up, saying, that's satanic, no, that's satanic, no, that's satanic, no, that's satanic. And John says, it was very clear that the Texans' interpretation of the ceremony differed from my own. My lasting impression was of an all-pervading sense of immaturity. The Elvis impersonations, the cod pagans, spooky rituals, heavy drinking. These people might have reached the apex of their professions, but emotionally they seem trapped in their college years. And then basically he accuses Alex of smearing Bohemian Grove in the same way that the mainstream media smeared Waco and Randy Weaver. Now, Mary Moore says, well, forget what other people say. They don't have underground sex tunnels. They're not burning babies. It's all bullshit. The elite of the world are indeed there. The thing that we should be concerned about is the lakeside talks. They are public policy talks where powerful people discuss and choose policy, but they do so in secrecy with no public scrutiny. And that's what people should be afraid of. And I tend to agree with her, to be quite honest. I think that if there is a conspiracy surrounding Bohemian Grove, that is the conspiracy. And it's a shame that Alex Jones framed it in such a way. But I will reiterate that I think he wound himself up. I think nowadays, I think he's just doubling down on the story. But I did find something out, and this is just a sort of to finish off. But would either of you like to go to Bohemian Grove?
I'd go just to check it out.
Out of curiosity, sure, yeah.
If you want, you might not be able to go, Jen, because it still is ladies, although they were sued in recent years because they felt that this was discriminatory. And actually, on certain days, women are allowed in there. And actually, even in the dark secrets inside Bohemian Grove, there's a couple of shots that appear to show women inside. So that might not be the case anymore. But if you want to get into this completely secret society, there is a way. There are certain things that you might have to do, but I can get you inside. What you need to do is you need to go to www.bohemianclub.com, and there you can apply to be a waiter to work there in July.
Is it like their official website?
Their official website of the Secret Society, yes, where you can apply for a job at the secret society.
Awesome.
It's included in the notes. So if anybody doesn't believe me, they can go to the notes for the show, or they can just go to bohemianclub.com and they can apply to be a waiter or to be a steward or various other jobs like litter picker and other things that happen there. They hire hundreds, if not thousands, of staff each year. Now, to be fair, they do have to sign NDAs and stuff like that. But that hasn't stopped people. You see, in 2010, on Reddit, a former waiter did an AMA. And basically, he says, you can ask me anything. Like, you know, I applied through the website and got a job there. It was quite well paid. They're not allowed to tip, but I actually quite enjoyed it. He says most of the craziness stems from the fact that the members were drunk all day long. They'd come to the breakfast hungover, have a drink at breakfast and drink heavily in the evening. So in general, a lot of drunken behaviour. The dining circle is a huge redwood grove and members just piss on the trees rather than in the toilets. I saw someone order a lobster for breakfast, and it's the kind of place where we had to make that happen. I saw Carl Rove cussing up a storm and loads of crazy things like that. And what he says that once they get pissed, they like to play with the food. So there's a lot of stacking food up and sort of like making it into models and stuff, and then getting glasses and plates and cutlery and stacking it up and stacking it up and stacking it up and stuff like that. Behaving like children, essentially, because they can get away with it.
That reminds me of Boris and his making buses out of wine boxes.
Well, maybe this is it. Maybe there's a propensity for the elites to stack things. I don't know. Maybe it's some ancient occult ritual. Like maybe, I don't know. Are they
Well, he
building
was a Bullingdon Club member. Huh? He was a Bullingdon Club member, so they
Just
do
like
a bit of hijinks.
Yeah, yes. Well, this is true. But again, this is another example of secret societies where basically they're outside of the scrutiny of people and, you know, the public. And it gives them the impression that they basically are rulers of the world, which to a degree they are. But, you know, but it's not helpful to encourage that, basically. He says that you need to show ID to get in, and there are guards at the perimeter, but now here's the interesting thing. He says that the security is not as impressive as you think. What tends to happen is that high-profile guests bring their own security detail. So basically, like, you know, the Bushes will have Secret Service there and stuff like that. Steely Dan played there one year, and he was particularly impressed by their performance. And he says, and this is going to really piss off some people, he says it's not uncommon to see Eric Clapton jamming by the side of the lake. So, you know, champion of the anti-vaxxers, Eric Clapton, whose hands stopped working right up until the point where they started working again, which is nothing to do with his years of heroin use and alcoholism. Like, he's actually a Bohemian Grove member and a regular attendee, and he loves nothing more than jamming along to these world domination talks, apparently. So, yeah, maybe, you know, pick your heroes more wisely. Carlos Santana apparently goes there, and apparently everybody clamours to try and sit next to Clint Eastwood because for some reason they all love Clint Eastwood there. They're like, as a fan of the film, like this is the thing. You've got all these really, really wealthy people in there, and apparently they turn to giggling 14-year-old girls in front of Steely Dan and the Grateful Dead who've played there, and Eric Clapton and Clint Eastwood and Danny Glover and apparently Mel Gibson and various people like that. And so, like, it's quite strange. He says his favourite guy is some bloke who's just known as the Frogman. He's a Japanese man who works for Nintendo, and he gives people little model frogs as thank you gifts, apparently. One of the things is that waiters can't actually start conversations. They can only respond to people. But he says that most people treat you very, very well. Some people are a bit belligerent because they're pissed. He says that one year, which indicates that he's been there as a waiter many years, one year a man brought a Siberian tiger just to show off.
Wow.
So, and apparently as well, there's lots of musical instruments scattered all over the place. A company brings in loads of grand pianos and puts them all over the forest because, you know, the weather's nice all that year. It never rains, and there's all instruments everywhere, which are then come and collected afterwards. So I suppose it's plausible that certain people might have bought a grand piano that has actually been in Bohemian Grove.
Look, if the plebs like us, and like obviously it wasn't just an all boys club, I'd love to go. All the instruments hanging around and like the nature and stuff, like I'd be chilling all day, man.
Apparently, it's very impressive. This is the point. He says, like, it's surprising what they have got in there. You know, there's electricity, there's telephone boxes and stuff like that. And he says that, yeah, they want to live in a certain amount of luxury. It has a rustic feel, but I fear it makes Centre Parks look shit. But that's what he says.
Elite Centre Parks, isn't it?
It's very, very elite Centre Parks. But then the chap basically reiterates that all cameras and cell phones are banned, and anybody, even a member who was caught with one of those items inside, would be immediately dismissed and probably kicked out of the club. So there we go. It transpires that actually there is a degree of a real conspiracy with this one. It's not quite what Alex Jones has put. And in many ways, Alex Jones is actually quite detrimental to the revealing of genuine concerns, like the lobbying, the powerful people behind closed doors, the dictating of power. But again, it's born into this satanic panic, this Christian thing. You were saying as well, weren't you, that people like Anthony Hilder and stuff like that, they were against Grove because they felt that it wasn't conservative enough.
Yeah, Anthony J. Hilder, and obviously it goes back to John Birch and them sorts of people. Like, they seem to think these people aren't conservative enough, so they want to paint them as like Satanists or just as bad as the commies.
It's
to me,
extreme.
Bohemian Grove provided the perfect opportunity for them to frame that in this sort of way. It did kick off, you know. Well,
it's surprising, actually. So the reason that they were able to sell it like that was because not that many people knew about it. Like, you know, despite the fact that there are sources out there, numerous sources, quite a lot of sources out there, and you can find out a huge amount about it. It is a very niche subject. What is surprising is that now that we're in the age of the internet, that more people don't know about this. Until we decided on the topic, I didn't realise how many people had been into the Grove before him. I didn't realise it had been on the news.
Yeah, and to Jones's credit, it is because of him. Yeah. And he might not be the first person that broke in or the first person that talked about it, but he's definitely the first person that filmed it. He was able to get out with it. It wasn't a very good footage. It was... I think it's kind of inspired a little bit by Blair Witch Project, to be honest. It came out a year after.
Yeah.
So I feel like he kind of wanted to have that feel to it, and it does.
There is an argument that basically what you said in the past is, well, maybe it wasn't satanic or maybe it wasn't like a real human sacrifice. But if your next door neighbours were burning a big fire pit in front of a 40-foot stone owl, would you let them look after your dog? Or words to that effect. And it's like, it is weird and it is strange, but anything can be weird if you look like the idea of transubstantiation, the idea that the host literally turns into the body of Jesus Christ inside your mouth. Some might say that's particularly strange, right? Okay, each their own. Like,
these people would actually, because they're Protestants, they're evangelicals. You know, they would actually say the Catholics are being like cannibalistic.
Certain people, Jen, think that the Catholics are actually behind the New World Order. It's not necessarily the Jews or Satanists that is the Catholics. And some people would even go so far, people like Jack Chick would go so far as to say that Catholicism is actually Satanism, but very, very well disguised. So again, this seems to be sadly what it is with a lot of these things. It's people trying to frame stuff as an agenda. And I tend to agree with John Ronson on that one. And basically, once you get down that slippery slope, you know better than the mainstream media demonizing people like the Waco and Randy Weaver. Did they have some strange views? Yes. Were some of the things that we're doing probably not the sort of thing that you'd want to do? Yes, absolutely. Does that make them inherently evil, white supremacist cult members, etc., etc.? No, it doesn't. And it's unfair to apply that in one sense and not apply it in the other sense, basically.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting. And you see this a lot with conspiracy cult leaders, especially some of the grifters that I've been exposing, is while they're telling you, look over there, look over there, look over there, there's children in tunnels under the White House. That's where all the children in danger are. And everyone's looking in that direction. No one is looking at the local area, at that
care homes, say, or
anything dodgy that might be going on the street that they live in, because they're all so convinced that all the real danger is over there. And it just causes so much damage. And it's done in so many different ways. But, it's interesting.
Yeah, here's the thing. It's fun to watch a horror film. it's not fun to be in a horror film. Do you know what I mean? So, but this is the thing, by projecting these sort of like obviously silly things like alien cat people or whatever, right? Okay, children in tunnels underneath the White House and stuff like that, you can dalliance in that crap without actually getting your feet dirty, if you know what I mean. Like, you know, you could go down, what you could do is, like, if you're interested in helping children, you could go to care homes, you could volunteer to be, say, a big brother figure or something like that. You know, you could give your time and effort, but that's a bit real. You know what's more fun or what's easier is being a QAnoner or whatever, basically.
I into that, yeah.
So, Jen, what do you think of Bohemian Grove then?
I think I really want to see a picture of school-age Alex Jones. That's my first thought.
I'll send you one for my own private collection.
Oh, thank you. I'm just, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? This sort of over-the-top theatrical where the elites, although I'm convinced actually that Centre Parks is still more expensive than Bohemian Grove, but that's
certainly if it's not the school holidays, it is. Or
exactly. Depends when you book. But exaggerated, ostentatious theatrics, and you know, oh, aren't we posh because we're doing a bit of Greek theatre. We're doing, but you know, of course it's the next level. But then you've got the Alex Joneses of the world that all tell you that the next level is literal sacrifice of children, when in reality it's a bunch of posh boys and, you know, tiddling on trees and reciting Shakespeare or whatever, and thinking that makes them intellectual or you know, whatever, cultured, exactly. And extra special, whilst dropping a few, you know, well, my country's doing this, what are you doing? Oh, we're thinking about doing this economically, what are you thinking about? You know, that is something that is awful and very real and highly likely. But because of the Alex Joneses of the world, everyone's doing the satanic panic and not, you know, focusing on real world issues that they're of a huge concern when all these powerful people get together and tiddle on trees.
Yeah, no, I think you've nailed it. Like, so there is an actual problem. But the cremation of care is really like Del Boy pretending he knows French phrases. Like, it's them saying, look how sophisticated we are, we've put on this play. And it's been interpreted by Alex Jones as something satanic.
Yeah, sad, really sad.
But it's crazy how that trope can perpetuate for years. And again, like, you know, till I'd sort of re-examined it, that was still my default thing. Oh yeah, it's some sort of ritual. But yes, we're done now. So thank you so much for coming on. It was really great.
It was a pleasure, and it was. I really feel like I've learned a lot tonight, and I'm very grateful for that. And it is fascinating. And
good. So you weren't bored.
No, not at all. There's so much I didn't know about it, and now you've explained it the way that you have, which was brilliant. It makes a whole lot more sense than the ramblings of Alex Jones, doesn't it?
Who'd have thought?
But thank you so much for having me on, and maybe we can do it again sometime. Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right.
See you later.
Take care. Thank you again.
Bye, guys.